to see something you don't want to see.
That sounds funny on tape, huh? Like us back here with blankets and stuff. I'm be like,
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's settle back down. Be $1, please. So before we went to the break, we talked about the different structures of leases as far as how they end. We talked about the 4 different types: the periodic tenancy, the estate for years, the estate at will, and the estate at sufferance. Those are the legal structures, the 4 possibilities. Now we want to get into how the rent payment is structured. What differentiated those? What was it all about? How they what? How they ended. This is about how they operate while they're going on. This is about what kind of lease you have while the lease is in effect. How you pay rent. What does your rent include? What does it not include? Here's what you need to understand about rent. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. There are different types of rent structures. Some things include things that are not included in other leases and vice versa. Some things that don't include things that you would normally maybe expect to be included in the lease payment. So we need to talk about what the words are, the verbiage, to describe these different types of leases. The lease that you guys are most likely familiar with is called a gross lease. Now when we talk about the words gross and net, gross means before expenses have been deducted from any number. So before expenses. What does net mean then? After expenses are deducted. So a gross lease payment, and everything about leasing is not from the tenant's perspective, it's from the landlord's perspective. Remember I said you're going to be on the landlord's side, most likely as a real estate broker. So when we talk about a gross lease, we're talking about the lease payment is made before we deduct expenses. Whose expenses are we talking about? The tenant's expenses or the landlord's expenses? The landlord's. So give me examples of some landlord expenses. Things that the landlord would have to pay after the rent comes to them. In other words, before they can really look at it and say, well, I made this much money off of this property. What things? Maintenance, okay? Well, and mortgage payment's an interesting one. Mortgage payment really has nothing to do with a landlord expense. That's an ownership expense, right? And landscaping, absolutely. What else? Insurance, if I've got employees, if it's a big enough property, or management fees, property taxes, all of those are going to be expenses that a landlord would have to incur. And in a gross lease payment, the landlord has to charge enough in the rent to cover those expenses, because none of those expenses are being passed along to who? To the tenant. Those expenses stay with the landlord. That means the risk stays with the landlord. That means the landlord doesn't necessarily know exactly how much money they're going to get month to month, because could something break and cause a big expense for the landlord? Absolutely. And that's a big risk for the landlord, especially if they're budgeting their income. Remember, for most people, when you own an investment property, this is not a sideline of work, this is their career. So would it be a big risk if your career is based on an income stream that might be completely wiped out for 6 months in a row by a major expenditure? Could a busted HVAC system wipe out 6 months worth of lease payments? Easily. Easily. And so a gross lease payment puts all that risk on the landlord. It's the best one from a risk perspective from who? From whose perspective? From the tenant's perspective, because the tenant knows exactly how much they're going to be paying on any given month, because they don't care. If the property taxes go up, who's got to pay it? The landlord. If the insurance becomes more expensive, who pays it? The landlord. If something breaks, who's going to fix it? The landlord. That's a gross lease payment. And that is most common in what type of transaction? What type of lease? Residential leases. Residential leases are almost always, in North Carolina they are always, they're required to be, gross lease payments. And generally speaking, you only see gross lease payments in residential leases. You could, in theory, have a commercial property leased in this way, but not very many commercial landlords are going to. Pretty much the only landlords who do gross leases are the ones who are required by law to do so, and that's going to be which ones? Which ones you think are required by law to do gross leases? Residential landlords. Residential landlords are required to do because we make the maintenance, for example, responsibility of who? The landlord in residential leases. That is not required in every lease type. And so if it's not required, what do you think the landlord's going to do? If they're not required to pay for those expenses, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to get rid of them. They're going to get rid of them as quickly as they can. We call that the net lease. This is the landlord offloading the risk. This is the landlord saying, no, I don't believe I will be responsible for maintenance. Matter of fact, I don't even believe I'll be responsible for property taxes, insurance. I'll let you handle all that. It's called a net lease. And why do we call it a net lease? Because from the landlord's perspective, once they get paid, what is there to deduct? Nothing. The landlord knows exactly how much revenue they're going to have month to month, because if the air conditioning breaks, who's hot? The tenant. And if they want it fixed, they'll pay for it. It's their responsibility. If the property taxes go up, who's paying them? The tenant is. Doesn't bother me. And so landlords much prefer this type of lease structure. You can't do this type of lease structure in a residential lease, so therefore where would you expect to find this kind of lease structure? In commercial leases. Almost all commercial leases, the vast majority of them, are net leases. They're very often called triple net leases because there are three main expenses that are passed off to the tenant in addition to the rent. Property taxes, maintenance, and insurance. Yes?
Is that legally set up? We couldn't do that in residential?
You cannot do it on a residential lease in North Carolina. That's North Carolina specific. That would be true in most states, but you know, it's definitely true in North Carolina. You cannot do a net lease in a residential setting because one of the, when we look at, which we're going to talk about in a minute, the Residential Rental Agreements Act in North Carolina, it specifically says that the landlord is responsible for maintenance. So you can't make maintenance a tenant responsibility in a residential lease in North Carolina.
So, don't pay. Over his property.
Yes, you talking about Kane and Associates? K-A-N-E? Yeah. Yes, they're mostly net leases. Most commercial facilities. We're going to talk about some other types of commercial leases here in a second, but this probably represents a good 80 to 85% of all commercial leases on the planet is the net lease. Now, what you would see, just FYI on the real, you won't see this on the test, but in the real world, you would potentially see a property that was being offered for lease, and you'll see two numbers. When you go to look at the rent on the property, you'll see two numbers. You might see something that looks like this. The property leases for $17.50 per square foot plus $3.25 TICAM. TICAM stands for taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance. So this is a triple net lease because what we're doing is we're giving the tenant three separate expenses that would normally be the landlord's. The tenant, in addition to paying their rent, is also going to pay taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance. Here's what's interesting about these two numbers. This one is the rent. This is what's getting paid for the landlord. This is simply an estimate for the tenant's benefit. Because what could this number do? It could change. It could change. If there's a maintenance problem, if the HVAC needs to be replaced, is that $3.25 going to get blown out of the water? Absolutely. If the property taxes go up, is that going to change that $3.25? That's simply there for estimation purposes. The only number that's actually locked in by the lease would be this portion of it. That's all I saw a hand. Is it you, Dave? No. Oh, it was you.
If you have a residential lease and then have a mortgage, you're responsible for maintenance. Are you like that?
You can't do it. Residential leases aren't allowed to make you responsible for maintenance. That's part of the Residential Rental Agreements Act.
I know someone that does definitely have one that has it where they're responsible for maintenance, so that's really.
Cannot be so. Not for, now when we say maintenance, we mean very basics. It's called the warranty of habitability. But anything that would go into that warranty of habitability is not negotiable on the residential side. So like heat, plumbing, electrical, foundations, roofing, all those things are considered the basics for it being habitable. On the residential side, they have to be maintained by the landlord. Now, anything outside of that, like cutting the grass, can you have a lease that makes that the tenant responsibility? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
If they have a price in the lease about basically falling out the curb, that they are responsible up to $200 of maintenance, is that legal?
No. Not if it's something that falls in that warranty of habitability thing. So again, when we get to the Residential Rental Agreements Act, what you need to understand is that the Residential Rental Agreements Act says this is the minimally acceptable level of renting a residential property. And the line item 1 is this thing called the warranty of habitability, which basically says that in order to lease a residential property, you have to maintain it in a certain condition. And so therefore you can't just have a blanket statement about maintenance. Now, it could be about maintenance that's not covered under that warranty of habitability. No, $0 a tenant is responsible for in a residential lease. That's exactly what they could do. They could go say that's not happening, I can take you to court. Now the real question is, are they going to be willing to actually take the landlord to court? Because what I find is people are big and bad until it comes time to go to the courthouse, and then they're like, I ain't got time for that. And, of course you have. I mean, you see all kinds of things in there that, you know, shouldn't be there, that would not be enforced in a court of law because they violate state law. Yes, ma'am.
Just for whatever reason, it sounds familiar to me. Have we not covered at least, like, touched on it a little bit before? Like, I guess, and we haven't done rental agreements before, but I guess like collecting money, but the responsibility of the building, it falls on whoever is being sold to. I don't know.
I don't know what you're...
It just really sounds familiar to me.
Are you just having a deja vu moment and wanted to share it with the rest of us?
I know it's before, but I was looking back and I'm like, man, this sounds familiar. Like, you know, I guess we touched on, I guess, like a question before.
Maybe we have. I don't remember specifically. I don't think we've specifically addressed that, but I mean.
We haven't done rental before.
No, certainly not. Definitely not.
Leases is like chapter.
No, this is the first time we've talked about leases.
Yeah, this is the first time we talked about leases.
Yeah.
I don't know, it sounds familiar.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's just basically, it's a structure of payment that basically just outlines what the tenant is responsible for and what they're not responsible for. And so in this structured payment, the tenant is not only responsible for paying rent, but they're responsible for maintaining the property, paying for the taxes, paying for the insurance on the property. Yes.
Say for example, this happened, I was renting and the heat come on,
Okay.
but I didn't pay rent because the landlord never fixed it. It was going on a month.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly. You can evict yourself, but you can't not do that.
I was going to let her get it out first.
I guess my basic question, how do you handle a situation like that where there's something that the landlord is responsible for but won't fix? Was it my responsibility to get it fixed and deduct it from the street?
Hold that thought till we get to the Residential Rental Agreements Act, because I know those questions will be answered specifically. See, that's the other thing you have to remember here. And it's very tough in this class. Your basic assumption is that when we're talking about real estate, we're talking about residential real estate. That's what they all jump to, right? How many times have I had to correct you and say property instead of house, right? Because you automatically assume if something's being sold, it must be a house, right? Remember, these buildings do exist, right? There are other types. And so we're going to get to and I'm not putting your question off. It's a great question, but I want you to keep this compartmentalized and realize we are talking about all leases right now. Your question is very specific to residential leases. And there's a law that governs that called the Residential Rental Agreements Act. And that's what all these other questions, it's not just yours. All these other questions have centered so far around the Residential Rental Agreements Act. The one thing I want to make clear to you about this lease is this is definitely not what kind of a lease. This is definitely not a residential lease, because the Residential Rental Agreements Act, which we're going to get to all the specifics of, requires first and foremost that the landlord pay for what? Maintenance. And so obviously that would eliminate this type. So what kind of lease are residential leases going to be structured as far as their payment goes? They're going to be gross leases. What kind of lease are they going to be structured as far as their end dates? Are they going to be tenancy? Are they going to be tenancy from period to period, or periodic tenancy? Or are they going to be estates for years? Which one are they going to be? They're going to be periodic tenancies with what kind of lease payments? With gross lease payments. See, you got to have both. One with how it ends, and one deals with how the rent is paid. Does that make sense? What are most commercial leases going to be? What type of structure first? Estates for what? Years. With what kind of rent structure? Net leases. That's most likely what you're going to see on the commercial side. Does that make sense? A residential tenancy is most likely to be a estate for period to period, periodic tenancy with a gross lease payment. Commercial leases are most likely going to be estates for years with a net lease payment. Everybody okay with that? I piece them together. Now, other types of commercial leases that are less common. The percentage lease, or sometimes just called a retail lease. Retail and percentage mean the exact same thing for lease structures. These leases fluctuate wildly from month to month because the lease amount is based on a percentage of the sales that the tenant does in the property. So the landlord is getting a piece of the action. This is a cut. This is the more you sell, the more you what? Pay. This is done exclusively in retail settings, and realistically only in one type of retail setting for the most part, shopping malls. This is a shopping mall lease. You would see this kind of lease in North Hills, Crabtree Valley, the streets at South Point. Man, whoever says malls were dying and forgot to visit Crabtree or South Point recently. God almighty. Went to South Point yesterday. Everybody in Durham County was out there. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. It was just nuts. Packed. None of them are at Triangle Town Center, though, I can tell you that, or Cary Town Center. Those are the exceptions, not the rule. But these are used in retail spaces. Here's why. A couple reasons. From the tenant's perspective, why would this be an advantage if you were the tenant? Why would you rather than having a flat lease amount, why would you rather have your lease be tied to your sales? Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, Shane.
I guess basically because let's say you have a month where you do really bad, your payment will be really low.
That's right.
The month that you do fairly well, your payment will
And
be
in retail, do you pretty much know there are going to be months where you're going to do really bad and months where you're going to do really well? I know y'all are new at this stuff, but I'm going to take a stab at what months would be really good if you're a retailer. December. And what months would be really terrible if you're a retailer? There's a very close relationship there, right? A lot of retailers have negative sales numbers for the month of January. Did you know that? They actually go in the hole in the month of January. You know why? Returns. Returns. Because all those count as negative sales. And all those returns come flooding back in January, and it usually outstrips what you actually sell. And so they need some relief in January. And so they'd much rather have their lease payments be structured such that if they have a bad month in sales, their lease also drops to a very manageable amount. Whereas when they're flush with cash in December, they can afford the higher amount. Does that make sense for you guys? So that's one reason that it works well for the tenant. Here's another reason it works well for the tenant. Don't you want the owner of the shopping center to try to help you generate business? And what's the incentive for them trying to help you generate business? If they get what? If they get a piece of the action. Does that make sense? So you want, if you're renting space in Crabtree Valley Mall, somebody posted a Facebook picture a couple weeks ago, and they were putting up daggum Christmas trees in Crabtree. Did anybody see that? They had like a Christmas in July thing, and they decorated half the mall for Christmas for that one weekend. Now, how much money do you think the mall owner spent doing that? That is not a small, they probably, easily probably what, $10,000 in manpower to put all that mess up and take it back down. Well, why were they willing to do that? Because it drives what? It drives business into the stores, and they know that ultimately they're going to get a percentage of that business. So it's a way to put the tenant and the landlord on the same team, so to speak, and help to generate business at the same time. If you're the landlord, obviously this is a good rent structure because it ultimately gets you paid more money if you can drive more traffic into the facility. Does that make sense? That's why this is used in retail. Now, what you'll find is that every lease is very different in those retail settings. Everybody has negotiated their lease on their individual basis. Would you expect that, for example, let's look at Crabtree. Would you expect that Belk's retail percentage lease would be a much smaller cut of the pie than the kiosks that are out in the hallways, that are out in the main corridors? Those kiosks, they are sometimes at a 20% split. So they're paying 20% of their gross sales back to the mall. I think Belk's is 3%, to give you a comparison. I think they're paying 3%. But at 3% of Belk sales compared to 20% of one of those little kiosks out there, which we, you can afford to give them a little bit of a deal for them. Now, they're still paying a base square footage rent. There's usually a base amount as well, but and then the percentages on top of that. Is everybody okay with that? Is that, yeah?
Who polices the conveyance or disclosure of your...
That's a really good question. Who polices it? The mall does themselves, because like in the case of Crabtree, they know the sale as soon as it happens. Every vendor who is in Crabtree Valley Mall is tied into Crabtree's point of sale system. They can watch the tallies as they happen. They know exactly how much Belk is sold that day, and they know how much Sears is sold or not sold that day.
So Skechers can't have that cash over.
Well, I mean, unless they're completely not putting it through their cash registers. Because if they put it through their cash registers, then the mall management's going to know. And that's a good question, because obviously, if you were going to have this kind of a system, do you need to have some very strict way of policing those sales to make sure you're being paid the correct amount, that you're invoicing the correct amount? Is that good for everybody? We understand a percentage lease? So,
What about the food yard? Are they being hired?
the food court, well, they're going to all have individually negotiated leases, but generally speaking, they'd be on a lower percentage than the big anchor stores would be, but a higher a higher percentage than the big anchor stores and lower than the smaller operators that are out in the kiosks, somewhere in between. But yes, they are on a percentage. Generally speaking, food sales are going to be at a little bit lower than retail, just because the margin is smaller on food than it is on clothing, for example.
They still pay CAM charges and taxes. They still have that kind of.
Yeah, so that they would still have all. So it's basically like a net lease for the base amount. They'll have a net lease amount. They'll have a TICAM expense, for taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance, and then they'll additionally have that percentage basis. Usually, for most of them, the biggest amount by far is the percentage chunk. That's where most of the revenue comes from, and that's why with malls and things like that, a lot of times the mall will choose not to renew somebody's lease, even if the tenant wants to renew it. The mall may kick them out because they may not be doing enough in sales. The mall may feel they can do better with a different tenant mix in there. So it gives the mall incentive for a lot of things that are good for the tenant, like not putting two of the same type of stores side by side. Because obviously that's going to hurt the sales of both of them. So the mall, it causes the mall to work real hard to have a healthier mix of tenants, and tenants that are going to do well playing off of each other and that sort of thing. All right? I mean, that's why your anchor stores are at opposite ends in most cases, because you don't want them, you don't want Macy's staring at Belk. You want some space in between them so that people have had time to forget how much money they spent at Macy's by the time they get to Belk. And they do it all over again. My understanding is that Crabtree's looking at a pilot program where they will hold your purchases the stores will send your purchases to a central location in the mall where you can pick them up, drive through and pick them up when you leave, because it would incentivize you to buy much more if you don't have to drag it around the mall with you. They've learned that from Disney. And I'm not kidding. That's actually one of the owners of the mall took his you know, his whole family to Disney World. And if you go to Disney World and you go shop in one of their stores, they don't make you drag that crap around in the park. They just ask you what hotel you're staying in, and when you get back, it's in your room. They deliver it for you. And what they found is it caused people to spend about 35% more in those shops because they don't have to. Because what was the excuse? Oh, honey, I don't want to drag that mess around with me all day. And now the clerk's standing right there in front of you. Oh no, ma'am, you don't have to do that. We'll take it to your room. And so they lost the excuse, right?
Or you have like small children.
Right.
Do something that they want, and you end up buying it twice because we don't have it anymore because we already sent it back to the room.
It's already back in the room. You forgot you bought it already. You get back, you got 2 of them.
Exactly.
There you go. See, my understanding is Crabtree's looking at a pilot program to do that same sort of thing during the holidays, especially. You know, because you know where people go, see, look, she's all right. That's great. I can spend more money. Like that's awesome. I can, you know, you don't have to be a pack mule run around the mall with 68 bags. So,
How about Amazon?
How about Amazon? I don't know. They make it already too easy. Already. Y'all saw we got one leg of the Amazon, puzzle in place. So we got a distribution center. It remains to be seen about what they're going to do about HQ2. But Garner got one of the distribution centers. So we are already in the Amazon sweepstakes, so to speak. But yes.
Actually, I've got a question. I heard somebody in my store was talking about the property that Amazon purchased for their warehouse.
Yep.
Was set because it was
It's a ConAgra plant.
Fire.
Right, it exploded.
And that it was stated that that property was going to be preserved for memorial for the people.
It was declared a brownfield. It was polluted. That's why it was abandoned. It was declared a brownfield, and Amazon's the only company that's come in and been willing to put up the money to clean it up. So.
Okay, that's good. Okay, but because I heard that it was.
The cleanup costs are pretty astronomical.
Memorial.
But the problem is it's a brownfield, and so you can't do anything
You
there.
can't allow anybody.
Right,
Okay, gotcha.
until it's cleaned up. Yep, because of the contaminants that were released in the fire. So yeah, Amazon's gonna, in exchange for some very healthy tax subsidies, which have not been published yet, they're gonna clean it up. Okay, and last type of lease payment structure that we'll talk about in commercial leases is the full service lease. And as the name indicates, what do you think this is going to be as far as cost goes? The most expensive lease structure there is. A full service lease in the commercial world is one that includes most anything the tenant needs. It usually includes at a bare minimum utilities. Janitorial services are usually included in full service leases. Sometimes it would include things like internet. Sometimes it includes furniture. They're leased furnished would be full service leases. This space is a full service lease. What that means is that we pay one lease amount, and that includes utilities, that includes the janitorial services, that includes those kinds of things, which obviously puts a lot of risk back on who? Tenant or landlord? Landlord. I mean, so if you want to find buildings that are generally the best managed buildings you'll find the ones that are leased on full service leases, because they stay on top of everything. They're the ones that have the programmable thermostats and the light switches that have motion detectors in them, and the no drip water faucets, the automated water. I mean, I will not be surprised if at some point in the next 6 months we end up with automated faucets in these bathrooms in here. You know why? Because at least once a week I walk in there and you know what it is? It's running. Who does that? I mean, who washes their hands? I'm just going to let the water run. It blows my mind. But what you realize is in places like this, it happens. And who knows how long it's been running when I walk in there and see it, And so it's not really any sweat off my back other than the fact that I just hate to see the water wasted. But, it doesn't cost me anything. But I would not be surprised if they start to look at the costs of those electronic motion-activated faucets, which I hate, by the way. I don't know what it is. I think I'm dead half the time. They don't work. I'm like waving in front of the thing and nothing's happening. I don't know. I don't have enough body heat or what the deal is. And they don't work. Have y'all seen the new fancy ones where it's water and it's got the dryer all built in one thing? No, wait till you see one of those things. That'll freak you out. It looks like, so some of y'all are going to laugh, some of you are have no idea what I'm talking about. You remember the old limousines that had the television antennas on the back of them, that sort of V-shaped antenna? That's what these faucets look like. And the water comes out the middle of the V. And then it has these two like blades that come off to the side. So you wash your hands in the middle, and then you hold your hands out to the side, and the dryer comes on. It's like all in one spot. So every sink has its own dryer. Like it's like crazy how efficient that is. You know, like it's nutso. You know, of course you got to be kind of like careful what you're doing, because sometimes you're washing and the dryer comes on, just blowing water all over the place. You know, you got to be real careful with it. But yeah. Those are mostly full-service leases, because obviously the landlord has a ton of incentive to limit waste, you know, to make sure that somebody doesn't have a hot flash and set the thermostat on 60 degrees and go home for the weekend. You know, that sort of thing. Mostly done in office space. This is mostly an office space type lease. And the reason you would see it done in office space is usually with office space you have buildings that are very divided. You have lots of tenants maybe even on the same floor. And so it's very hard to separate expenses out, because they may share bathrooms, they may share like corridors or conference rooms and that sort of thing. So they've got a lot of shared spaces. It's easier just to spread it out, you know, let the landlord pay for everything and then work it back into the lease. Yes?
For hotels, which would be better for hotels, like a high-end hotel?
Well, hotels, you mean from the tenant's perspective, how they're paying? Well, the tenant's perspective is always full service on a hotel, because you know they're including things like utilities, and you know, and you're not paying for those additionally. You're not paying for how much water you used or how much electricity you used, or you know, that sort of thing. It's worked in. So that's a decent example of full service on a more of a residential type setting. But generally speaking, these are office leases. By far. Okay? Ground leases. Ground leases are something that sometimes I think people don't really wrap their brain around. Generally speaking, we don't think of the tenant as spending a bunch of money on a property. Well, the more you get into commercial real estate, the more you realize that tenants can and do spend a bunch of money on property. Like, for example, most restaurants are built in spaces that are leased. Who do you think's spending all the money to build that place out the way the restaurant wants it built out? It's most likely who? The restaurant, the tenant, right? It's not the owner of the property who's investing that money. It's usually the tenant. Well, go one step further. Go one step further. The tenant's not even leasing a building. They're simply leasing what? The land, the ground. And the idea is quite simple. If you want to have a building here, feel free. Go ahead and build yourself a building. But all I'm leasing you is what? The land, the ground. It's called a ground lease. Now, these don't have to be long-term, but if you're the tenant and you're going to spend enough money to actually build a structure here, would you probably want some type of a very long-term lease? Yeah, very commonly 99 years. That's a very common one. There's a reason I have this particular picture here. This company is the most notorious and common utilizer of ground leases that you're all familiar with. Now, you may not be familiar with or know what a ground lease was or that they did them, but I'm going to explain to you their business model. This company does not make money selling hamburgers. They don't. They make money from real estate, because it's their franchisees who make money selling hamburgers. Their franchisees, the people who own the individual locations, make their money selling hamburgers. This company makes their money by owning the ground that that store is built on. Now notice I didn't say they own the store. They own the what? The ground. Because here's how a McDonald's franchise works. If you want to get a McDonald's franchise, first of all, you write a check to them for $350,000. That's step one. That opens the conversation. It's a good conversation starter, right? Then you present them with your business plan and where you would like to locate the franchise. McDonald's Inc. comes in and looks at, is this a good location for one of our restaurants? If they decide that it is, then McDonald's will go and negotiate with the landowner and purchase the land. Notice who's not purchasing the land. The franchisee, the one who's going to own the restaurant. McDonald's will step in, go in, and purchase the land. And then they will lease that land back to the franchisee for 20 years. With stipulations of exactly what that store has to look like when they build it. That any deviation from building it to this plan is a violation of your lease, and if you violate your lease, you do what? You get out. And you take anything that's not attached with you. What's attached? That building. And so who does that then become the property of? McDonald's. And then they go and they do the exact same thing with the next person. This is the reason, folks, do you notice that McDonald's stores are renovated at about 3 times the speed of other fast food chains? How many Burger Kings do you look at and you think, I know that's a Burger King, that's been a Burger King for the last 40 years, you can tell by the way you can see the shape of the building, right? And you know from 10 miles away that's a Burger King. And they haven't touched it since the day they walked out when they built it. That's because Burger King doesn't franchise in this way, or many of the other stores don't. See, McDonald's doesn't spend the money to update those stores. You know who does? The franchisee. You know why? They don't have a choice. Because when that 20-year lease comes up for renewal, McDonald's will say, sure, be glad to renew it, as long as you spend $3 million on these updates to your building. And if you don't, what? Then your lease expires. Take anything that's not attached with you, and we'll lease it to somebody else.
You can at least take your camera.
You can take the hamburgers. You can take the hamburgers.
The equipment.
Some of it.
What type of fixture?
If it's not a fixture, excuse me.
It's
Trade fixtures, yeah. It depends on, and they may have specifics about, I think a lot of that stuff is proprietary to them, so it probably specifies you have to leave that too. Yeah, you'd have to check their contract. But do you understand that basic idea here? Who owns the land? McDonald's. But then you have a franchisee who is leasing the land and then spending the money to construct the building. Yes?
So, I'm finally got this clear. It is up to the franchisee to repair the broken ice cream. Is that correct?
In McDonald's anyway. I don't know about every other company, but in their
It's always broken.
it's up to them. And I'm pretty sure that there's probably something in their contract that they could lose it if it's consistently not working, etc. But that's why you see, like for example, this one down here on Wake Forest Road. I know for a fact that the franchisee was threatening to lose that one until they spent, you know, and you notice they're in the middle of renovating the interior of that store extensively. It's a terrible spot. I mean, first of all, the drive-through is downstairs from the store. I don't know if it's the weirdest thing you've ever seen. It's an odd physical location for sure. All right, we good on the ground lease? Okay, good. As far as what leases have to have, they're the same as any other contract. We need a meeting of the minds or mutual agreement. Offer and acceptance all has to be there. Consideration, what do we say consideration was? Not the exchange of money, but the what? The promise of the exchange of something of value. It's got to be a contract for a legal act. You can't have an enforceable contract if the thing that you're promising to do is illegal. And then you got to have that legal capacity. So same rules as basic contract law. Here's a piece of terminology you should be familiar with as far as leases go, something called upfitting. Upfit. Now this is not fixing up. This is not repairing. This is not updating. Those are all words they'll use to try to confuse you on a test about upfit. Upfit is a very specific thing that happens in commercial real estate transactions. When the landlord is spending their money, the landlord's money, to make the property more useful for the tenant. Not for all tenants, but for that particular one. This is money that the landlord spends to go in and change something about the space to make that space more useful for this particular tenant. It's a customization for the tenant. So like for example, if you were going to open a beauty salon, and you went and looked at an empty space, what would be a likely customization that you would need for a salon? Sinks. You need a bunch of plumbing done, right? You need electrical outlets everywhere. You need sinks. You need plumbing. That's probably not going to already be in that space. Is that going to be a large expenditure?
Yes.
Absolutely. Is that an expenditure that maybe a lot of salons would not be able to incur themselves as part of starting up? So the landlord may offer to pay for that for the tenant. It's called an upfit. Now, it comes at a trade-off. What do you think the trade-off is going to be? Higher what? Higher rent over the course of the lease. The more upfit you need the landlord to pay for you, the more your monthly and annual rent amounts are going to be. And by the way, everything is annualized. We start talking about investment property. When we get to the math involved with investment property, when we talk about $17.50 per square foot rent, that's an annualized rent. So if you wanted to do the math, for example, on something like that, let's say you had a 4,000 square foot space. That's $17.50 times 4,000 square feet, which is an annual rent of $70,000. That's what you'd be looking at for annual rent on a 4,000 square foot space at that number. Yeah.
So within where that fits a property for tenant,
Yep.
is it like, are you likely to see a higher remedy? Kind of, say the tenant's only there for a month and then they leave and the landlord has spent all this money.
Mm-hmm.
Is it likely to see more of a
Well-
remedy cost to void or to sever?
Well, you won't see anything like liquidated damages in one of these leases. Once you sign this 7-year lease, you're on the hook for all 7 years of them. And usually they come with personal guarantees and all kinds of things. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of penalties to breaching one of these. Okay, is everybody good? It's not fixing it up, it's not updating it, it's not making it pretty, it's simply customizing it. Now, could customizing it make it pretty? Sure. But most likely this is some type of customization. For example, this space had to be dramatically upfit for us to move a real estate school in here. What do you think was in this space? Think about the rest of the character of this building. What's the rest of this building? Offices. What do you think this space looked like before we moved in here? Not cubicles, walls. This room was 5 separate offices. 5 separate offices in this room. So what do you think the upfit was? Tear out the walls. Not only tear out the walls, you have to put new flooring down. Mm-hmm. Yep. So when you see 3 big classrooms, what you can imagine is each one of those was several offices. The only 3 rooms that remain untouched in this space from what it was before are the 3 offices that are down that hallway there. Leslie's office, my office, and the instructor office at the end are the only 3 rooms that were not completely gutted, renovated as part of our upfit. The total upfit cost was about $122,000 that the landlord paid. Now, of course, they'll recoup that in the form of rent over a 7-year period. No, 7. 7 with 2 5-year renewal options in there. And of course, a rent escalation clause every year. So the rent does what every year? Goes up. Mm-hmm. Welcome to commercial real estate. Okay, everybody good on this upfit? Good. Assignment. We talked about assignment in basic contract law. What was an assignment? Changing what? Changing the parties on an agreement. Not the contract, not the agreement, but the parties. What party are we likely to change in a lease? There's only 2 parties, the landlord and tenant. Which one is likely to change? The tenant. So this would be an example of a tenant who for some reason cannot or does not want to fulfill their lease responsibilities. Does that make sense to everybody? For whatever reason, they cannot or they don't want to fulfill their lease responsibilities, so they are doing what? And what's the most likely reason they cannot fulfill their lease responsibilities? They've done what? They've gone out of business. They've gone out of business, by far the most common reason. But they're still on the hook for those lease payments, folks. Going out of business doesn't get you out of the lease. So what would you immediately scramble to try to find if you were that tenant? Someone else to do what? To take over your lease. That would be an assignment. That would be an assignment. Finding someone else to take over your lease, because you would be asking the landlord, can you please remove me from the lease and put this person in my place? What's going to change about the lease itself? Nothing. Just the name. Just the name. Just the tenant's name would be the only change that would be made. They would pay the same rental amount as the original tenant had. Does that make sense for everybody? Now that's a little bit different than a sublease. In a sublease, the original tenant's name does not come off of the lease. In a sublease, you're going to end up with two tenants' names on the lease. You're going to end up with the original and the new. The landlord has two options then to get paid, because who technically owes them the money? Both parties. Very often you would use a sublease rather than an assignment when you're subleasing for less money than the primary contract calls for. So like, for example, if somebody had leased a space at $17.50 and they can't find anybody to take it over at $17.50, but they have found somebody who'll take it over at $15. Could they sublease it to that tenant for $15 a square foot? Yes, but then they would have to do what with the difference? They'd have to pay the difference. The landlord is still getting the $17.50, but they would look at it as, well, I'd rather pay $2.50 than $17.50. That's a sublease. Yep.
Does that have to be in your contract that you're allowed to sublease?
Yes. So subleases and assignments are not allowed unless you have the permission of both parties. So generally speaking, your original lease would specify whether the landlord allows assignment and subleasing. In commercial real estate, most of the time they do, as long as the landlord has the ability to approve the new tenant. Usually that's what they would want, is the ability to approve the new tenant. And so this is good, because this is good for everybody in a commercial setting. Because if you've got somebody that's out of business, yes, they're legally responsible for the lease, but it's not realistic to expect that you're going to be able to collect it from them. So it would be very nice if they could help you as a landlord find a new tenant to go in the space. So it kind of puts everybody on the same team again. Everybody good on these? All right. That's assignment and sublease. Why can the landlord enter the property? Well, the answer is for no reason. They can't unless they have reserved the right to enter the property. When you lease a property, folks, the first thing that you're giving to the tenant is the right of possession. All of the right of possession. Does that make sense? And we have talked about that before. We talked about that bundle of legal rights. You're giving away the right of possession. So the only person who has the right to occupy that property or be in that property or possess that property is who? The tenant. How could a landlord reserve the right to enter the property? Where would they need to do that? In the lease itself. In the written lease itself. So if you want to reserve the right to enter the property for maintenance, had you better have a written lease? Yes, absolutely. And so usually what you would see in a written lease, these are some common reasons why a landlord might reserve the right to enter the property for maintenance purposes, for repairs, for inspections that would happen on some sort of a normal scheduled basis. Those would all be reasons that a landlord might want to re-enter a property, for example. Okay? But just make sure you've reserved that in the lease itself. Leases don't have to be in writing, but should they be?
Yes.
Yes. Because if they're not in writing, what are you going to end up with? Month to month, and that's it. You know, you're going to end up with month to month. And is that what most landlords and tenants want as far as a lease goes? That's a very uncomfortable place to be in for most landlords and tenants. Now, there are some rules about leases, though, and being in writing, and then even further than that as far as being recorded. Let me ask a basic question. If a lease doesn't even have to be in writing to be enforceable, do you think it has to be recorded to be enforceable? No. How would you record something that's not in writing? But there comes a point when the law says you do have to put it in writing. And that point is 3 years. The law says that if you ever intend for a lease to be in to be more than 3 years, you have to put it in writing. And here's why. You also need to record it. For it to be enforceable, if it is for longer than 3 years, fully enforceable, if it's for longer than 3 years, it needs to be recorded. Here's the why of that. Think about somebody who's buying a property. What are they also buying when they purchase a property if that property is leased? What comes with the transaction? The lease. They have to honor the lease. The lease is an appurtenance, right? And so the lease transfers with the ownership. That means the new owner has to honor the lease. This is where I'll say something like that and you look at me and you're like, and then I'll ask you the most obvious question and you'll be like, no. So somebody's buying their first house and it's got a lease for the next 6 months. They close on it. Can they tell the tenant they need to leave?
No.
No. Absolutely, positively, no. The lease comes with the property. The new owner has to honor the lease. Does that make sense? What if you bought a property and you found out it was leased for the next 25 years? That would be a heck of a shock to the system, right? Well, it actually wouldn't matter. Because here's what the state says. If that lease is for longer than how long? 3 years. 3 years. Then the only way that new owner has to honor that lease is if the lease was what? Recorded. The new owner does not have to honor that lease unless the lease had been recorded. Here's why it has to be recorded. Remember we talked about a title search? If it's recorded, isn't it going to come up as part of the title search? In other words, the new owner, the new purchaser is going to be very aware of that lease before they do what? Before they buy the property. So there, they have no excuse. They can't say, I didn't know it was leased for the last 25 years, because the court's natural response is going to be, well, all you have to do is come look, because it's recorded right here. Does that make sense for everybody? Yes,
I
ma'am.
have a quick question. Isn't the Connor Act saying that it has to be recorded? So when it says only leases of more than 3 years are covered by the statute of frauds, wouldn't it be the statute of frauds and the Connor Act?
Only leases of more than 3 years are always covered by the statute of frauds. In other words, they always have to be in writing. Leases of more than 3 years are not always covered by the Connor Act. They are enforceable between the two parties, landlord and tenant. I don't care if it's a 100-year lease, you don't have to record it. It's enforceable between the landlord and the tenant.
When some other party comes into
But
it.
for the third party, it has to be recorded.
Okay.
And that's why it's best just to say that it's only leases of more than 3 years that need to be recorded if you want to hold that third party, that future purchaser, responsible. So let me get you to turn this around in your brain a little bit, rather than trying to memorize something. In whose best interest would it be to record this lease? The landlord or the tenant?
The tenant, because when a new landlord comes into
The
play.
tenant. Because the new landlord comes in, if it's not recorded, what can they do? Kick them out. Raise their rent. Do whatever they want to do, because they don't have to what? Honor the lease. Does the tenant have to honor the lease? Yes, the tenant's always got to honor the lease, because they did what? They signed it. So in whose best interest is it to record this lease for more than 3 years? The tenant's. Very much the tenant's. Is the landlord going to want you to record this lease? No, because it's the best thing in the world for the landlord if you don't record this lease. Think of what the sales pitch is going to be to the next person coming in to buy this thing. They're going to come in and they're going to show somebody around this building and be like, yeah, this business is doing real well. And the new potential buyer says, well, how much are they paying in rent? And the landlord's going to have this little shit-eating grin. He's going to snicker, right? He's going to say, that's the good part. Yeah, they're paying $5,000 a month right now, but you can double that as soon as you walk in the door. Because they didn't what? They didn't record their lease, so their lease isn't worth the paper it's written on as soon as you buy this place. And what? Is that going to be a selling feature for some unscrupulous landlord? If you don't think so, then you haven't checked humanity lately, I hate to tell you. So if a tenant has a long-term lease, where's the first place they should go after they sign it? To the county courthouse and record that lease. So they protect themselves. Is everybody okay with that? All right. So let's talk about the residential rentals. Now we get to the questions about the residential rentals and what specifically applies. Now you got to remember to compartmentalize this stuff. These rules only apply if we're doing what? Leasing residential property. These rules do not apply to commercial property. The first thing it says is we have to have this warranty of habitability. It says the landlord is required by law to maintain the property in a way that is fit for human occupancy. What does it say about the bottom part there? This is not what? This is not negotiable. There is no legal way to negotiate this. What that means is it doesn't matter if the tenant doesn't care that you don't fix their heat. You have to. The tenant can't say, well, I'll just pay you less rent and you don't have to fix the heat. No. The landlord can't offer, well, why don't you pay to fix the heat and then I'll lower your rent. No. None of that is negotiable in the state of North Carolina. Does that make sense? Start to answer your question a little bit now? Okay. So there is no negotiability about this warranty of habitability. They're not allowed to negotiate about it. So just some examples of things that the state says have to be part of this warranty of habitability. It says you have to have heat capable of maintaining 65 degrees interior temperature. Okay? That's one thing. It doesn't say cooling, correct? Are you with me? It doesn't say cooling. It says heat. That's the bare minimum. The bare minimum is heat. Working plumbing and electrical, so no plumbing or electrical issues. And smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. They have to be installed in the property. Those are requirements by the state of North Carolina. Now let me talk to you further about this. These are the bare minimums. This is meant to say if the property doesn't meet these criteria, don't do what? Don't lease it. Period. Do not lease it as a residential lease if the property doesn't fit this criteria. This is the bare minimum acceptable by law. Is everybody good with me on that? This does not say that as a landlord, this is all you have to maintain. Because basic contract law says that if you negotiated a rental amount with a tenant and the property contains certain features, then you have to maintain those features throughout the term of the lease. So does it say anything about air conditioning here? But if the house has air conditioning in it when you lease it, do you have to maintain the air conditioning? Yes, because you have negotiated, presumably would the tenant have negotiated a much lower rental amount if the home did not have air conditioning. And that's why you cannot choose to not fix it after the... Does everybody understand me on that? So this basically sets up the bare minimum for even considering leasing the property. But once you've leased the property, what does the bare minimum become? Whatever condition it was when? When they signed the lease. That becomes the bare minimum condition for that point forward. Whatever condition it was in, the moment they signed the lease becomes the bare minimum condition. So when you talk about repairing things, the question is, well, was it there? Was it provided when they moved into the property? So I'll ask you a question. Do you have to maintain a refrigerator for a tenant? If there was a refrigerator there when they moved in and it was in working order, do you have to maintain it for the tenant? Absolutely. Because the idea is that they worked that into the amount that they agreed to pay. Does that make sense? The idea here is as a landlord, you're essentially renegotiating the lease by getting to decide what you do and don't have to fix later on after, and you don't get to do that. You don't get to do that. So when I was a residential property manager, when we had properties that had refrigerators and washers and dryers in them, when the tenant moved in, we unhooked them all. And we pulled them out from the wall. And we put a note on the front of them. that says this refrigerator has no value. We have no idea if it works. Did we know if it worked? Yeah. We are not providing it to you as part of your lease. You are more than welcome to try it, and if you find that it works, you're more than welcome to do what? Use it, but we will not maintain it. Because if we left it sitting there plugged in and it broke, what do we have to do? Fix it. Now when it breaks, what do? Sorry, glad it worked for you this long. Is there a huge difference there? Absolutely. My job is to represent who if I'm the property manager? The landlord. Part of that is minimizing expenses, right? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Can they take the refrigerator when they move out?
Can they take the refrigerator? No, we have not gifted it to them. We've said they simply could use it. They simply could use it. Yep. So make sure you understand the difference, because there is a dramatic difference between what the minimums are for even having a tenant move in. Like for example, if you don't have some type of permanently installed heat system that's capable of maintaining 65 degrees, can you even lease that property as a residential? No, you cannot. Not in North Carolina. Yes.
So you have to have the refrigerator pulled out, and with that note on there, you showed
When they sign the lease, at the moment they sign the lease.
So you're saying like,
Do not change it. Do not get devious and say change it after they looked at the property. The moment they sign the lease, they should know what they're agreeing to. So it should stay the same from showing to signing. So you shouldn't make changes to the property.
so when they go to tour the apartment and you look at it, the refrigerator's pulled out and the notes on there.
I understand. Absolutely. As far as we know, it works. The last tenant was using it, but it's not part of the lease. Just be very clear with them about it. Okay? Now, other things about the Residential Rental Agreements Act. The tenant can never withhold rent for any reason at all. Does that answer your second question? The tenant must always pay rent as long as they are still in occupancy of the property. If they're still maintaining the property, they must continue to pay rent. They can't negotiate the rent away. They can't not pay it and essentially hold it hostage until the property is repaired. They can't schedule the repair and deduct it from the rent. None of those are allowable in North Carolina. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's the way the law works. The law gives such a tenant one option. I've had this conversation already one time today. She's got an infestation problem, brown recluse spiders. So the law allows the tenant one option if the landlord is not maintaining the property appropriately. Let me be clear about the build-up to this. You need to give the landlord adequate time to correct the issue, which means give them written notice of the problem. Here, one of the big problems that tenants have is they do everything on the daggum telephone. Stop. Just stop. If that is your habit in life, get out of that habit. Yes, it is wonderful to talk to people, and in fact you should, because a lot gets lost in translation in text and email. But follow it up with something in writing. Are you good with me on that? So the first thing is, if you're giving the landlord notice, give it to them in writing, because that's what the law specifies, written notice, and then give them adequate time to make the repair. Now, adequate time to make the repair is going to be a very gray area. Nobody really knows what that is. I can tell you for something like heat, it's pretty quick turnaround, especially if we're in the middle of winter. For something like brown recluse spiders, I'd say adequate time is probably a month to address that problem. If I had to guess about what most magistrates would say, I'm guessing, but I'd say probably a month would be a reasonable time. But if you have given the landlord, if the tenant has given the landlord appropriate notice and the landlord still has not taken steps to correct the issue, the tenant has one option. It's called constructive eviction. You need to know it for the test. Constructive eviction is the tenant evicting themselves. The tenant is evicting themselves from the property. They're basically doing what? Breaking their lease. They're breaking their lease. They're moving out without notice, because the landlord has not lived up to their end of the bargain. Does that make sense for everybody? That is the one option that the state of North Carolina gives you as a tenant. Now, you have to continue to pay rent up until when? Until you move out of the property, until you vacate the property. Rent has to be paid all the way up until the time you vacate the property. That's not optional. But when you do vacate the property, you can cease paying rent. And, in theory, you can sue the landlord for rent you paid while it was uninhabitable. So for that period of time when you were fighting with them about fixing the property, you have to pay for it up front, but you could go sue the landlord, and most likely you're probably going to have to sue him anyway. And here's the reason you're probably going to have to sue him. If you constructively evict yourself, what are most landlords going to probably try to keep? Your security deposit. Folks, they cannot keep your security deposit for non-fulfillment of the lease if you have constructively evicted yourself. Because the whole idea behind constructive eviction is who breached the contract first. The landlord did. So what they did, let me test you here. The lease was a valid contract to begin with, right? The landlord, by not maintaining the property, breached the lease. What does it become? What type of contract does it become? That becomes a voidable agreement because one party has breached it, and so it's now only enforceable on how many parties? One. On which one? The landlord. And who is no longer bound by that agreement? The tenant. So they can do what? Move out. They can move out. And presumably if they sued the landlord, they would not only get their security deposit back, but any rent that they had paid while the property was in that uninhabitable status. So to now go back to full circle to your question, something like rent, I mean like heat. How long did that go on? 3 months during the winter. Okay, did you give them written notice about the? No. Okay. So next time, if that did, has it been fixed yet?
Well, that was way back.
Okay, you're not in that property. So if anybody ever finds themselves in that situation, the first thing to do when you have a maintenance issue is to give written notice. Written notice doesn't have to be certified mail. What email qualifies written notice? Absolutely. Send them an email and say, here's the problem. Document the problem. That way you have a date and time to document the problem. And then document if they don't respond. You know what the best way to document somebody hasn't responded is? Send them another email that says, it's been 7 days and I have not gotten a response from you. That's the best possible documentation you can have of somebody not responding to you. Because otherwise you just walk in there and you go, I don't know, it was a while. You know, go back a week later and send them another email. I've not heard back from you. You have to take care of this. This needs to be done. You need to let me know what's going on with this. And then if it's not taken care of, evict yourself. That's your option. But that's really your only option. Unfortunately, that might not be, I hear people all the time, and I'm very sympathetic to it. But legally, there's just really no other option. People will say, well, I don't want to move out, I like where I live. Then what are you going to have to do? Deal with it. Deal with it. Because there's really no way to force the landlord to make the repair. What you can do is walk away. It's a lot like a sales transaction. If one party breaches the sales transaction, the other one still wants to buy the house, and they close, they pretty much let the first one who breached off the hook, right? Same idea here. By continuing to rent the property, you're letting the landlord off the hook, so to speak. So really, this is your only legal option. Yes, sir.
So if heat broke, but your code was running space, can you kind of trap the landlord in a sense to say you got 6 months left on your lease, stay there 5 more months without
No.
that having been fixed, and then go back and sue for 5 months plus?
No.
Is there a time limit?
No, because any magistrate is going to look at this. This is going to be a magistrate deciding this, and they're going to look at somebody like that and they go, "Scumbag, get out of my face."
Yeah.
Literally, they'll say that in a court in North Carolina. Trust me, magistrates do not care. They have no whatevers to give. Trust me. They are not judges. They do not have the decorum of judges, and they will insult you and laugh in your face in court if you try to put something like that over on them. Because they would say, you know, you're constructively evicting yourself for no heat, and you chose to live there for 5 months without heat. You know what? They would just say, no, I'm sorry.
Is there any good rule, or should you proceed?
Case by case basis.
Okay.
Case by case basis. I think it's going to be based on what I mean, they're going to get a gut feel for how it's being presented to them.
Reasonable time of repair.
Yeah, absolutely. And what the temperature is outside and all those kinds of things weigh into it. Okay? So tenants can never withhold rent. Tenant must always pay the rent. If you see that on the test, make sure you choose that answer according to the Residential Rental Agreement type. Yes?
If you do decide to sue, will the court expenses and everything be on the landlord, or do you get reimbursed after?
If you're victorious, you get reimbursed. Well, if you, and people I think are really reluctant to file such a lawsuit. Here's what I'll tell you, folks. It is very simple to represent yourself in one of these cases. If a landlord has improperly kept your security deposit, if a landlord has not maintained the property, if you go down to the county clerk's office and you just explain, I mean, you just go to the clerk of court's office and you say, here's what I need to do. They will show you what form and tell you what you need to do to file that. And just bring your documentation to court. And magistrates hear this stuff all the time. They are very good at sniffing out who's telling them the truth and who's not. And if you can prove, hey, I asked them 3 times to fix the heat over the course of a month and they never did, you're going to win that case and you're going to get your security deposit back and you can get your court costs back. And you know, it's not nearly as scary of a process, I think, as some people think it is to go and represent yourself in a case like that. Yes, ma'am. So different types of damages, like what kinds of damages? And what moving expenses will be what kind of damages? I'm testing you with your own question. Help her out. Moving expenses will be what kind of damages? Compensatory, because she has a receipt for them, right? That's compensatory. So could you presumably sue for compensatory damages? Yes. Now, whether a magistrate would be willing to grant that, I have no idea. It's going to depend on who you got that day and you know what your case and how they feel about your case. I would say this: if it was middle of the winter and it was the heat that was broken and it was below, you know, freezing every night for 2 weeks and the landlord made no effort to get you heat or get you somewhere there was heat, they probably would hold the landlord responsible for moving expenses and something like that. I mean, because it does get weighed on a case-by-case basis. But yes, you can certainly ask for compensatory damages. Yep. Okay. Everybody okay on that? The idea of constructive eviction and what what a tenant can do if the landlord's not holding up their end of the bargain. The Rental Agreements Act also sets up the eviction process. That is called summary ejectment in North Carolina. Summary ejectment is the only legal method of evicting a tenant. There are plenty of non-legal methods of evicting a tenant. Changing the locks, showing up with a shotgun. People have removed all the toilets. People have removed all the doors. I mean, you name it, people have thought of it. Turning the water off. You know, none of that is legal. The only legal mechanism is summary ejectment, and I said it takes about how long? About 45 days. It's usually heard by a magistrate. That case is usually heard by a magistrate. All the other stuff is known as self-help eviction, and it's very much illegal.
In the same sense, I'm sorry, somebody else has a question?
That's all right. Go ahead.
In the same sense as, say, a landlord would want to turn the lights off on a tenant, that's still yet not the legal way.
No, you cannot do that. You cannot do that. Yes. Yeah, can't do it here. Yeah, here that's called breaking and entering. And landlords have gone to jail for that. You know, for going in and removing tenants' property. Yeah. Yes.
What if you release a bunch of ground leases?
No. No. Self-help eviction with all the examples of that. Summary ejectment's the only way. All right? This law is something that is fairly new in North Carolina, and it's a good change in my opinion. When the mortgage meltdown happened, one of the most mistreated groups of individuals were not the people who were being foreclosed on, though there was plenty of that to go around. It was actually the tenants who were living in properties that were foreclosed on. Imagine if you're paying your rent every month on time, and you come home one day and there's a notice on the front door from the sheriff that you have to be out in 10 days because the property has been foreclosed on by Bank of America. That is where tenants routinely found themselves during this meltdown because they had no idea that the owner of the property was not doing what? Paying the mortgage. I mean, all the mail was going to the owner's other address, wherever that happened to be. They had no idea this was playing out. And then all of a sudden, because that's all the notice that was required in the state of North Carolina at that point in time was 10 days. And so they would come home and find a notice on the front door from the sheriff that said, you got 10 days to get out of the property. So the state legislature, like many other states at that time, passed this law called the Protecting Tenants at Foreclosure Act. You don't need to know the name of the act, but basically here's what the law says, that any purchaser of property who buys it at a foreclosure auction, and who's most likely to buy it at the foreclosure auction? The bank themselves. But anybody who buys a property at a foreclosure auction must honor the leases. Any outstanding leases, what the statute or law says is bona fide leases. What that means is written leases. So any written leases that exist on the property that are for a fair market value, etc. And there's, of course, always gray area and stuff like that. But basically, any leases that exist, the new owner who purchases it at the foreclosure sale must honor those leases. So essentially, if Bank of America forecloses on the house, they've got to honor the lease and take care of the tenant in the same way that the previous owner would. So that's a positive change in my opinion, because this was not the tenant's fault in most cases, most of these tenants, and it was a horrible outcome for them because not only did they have to move out on 10 days notice, do you think they got their security deposits back? Even though they were supposed to, think of who owed them the security deposit. The person who was just foreclosed on, right? So it was really ugly, really ugly. As far as security deposits, the North Carolina Tenant Security Deposit Act. This is one of the most important laws for you for test-taking purposes and if you do go into property management as a real estate broker. Knowing what you can and cannot do with a security deposit in the state of North Carolina. Now, the first thing to understand, and this I should have put this on a slide by itself. Circle this first bullet point. All tenant security deposits in this state must always be held where? In a trust account. Now remember I said very rarely do we say all and always, right? I just said both of them in the same sentence there. So how many exceptions are there to that rule? None. So your grandma owns a house. She's in a nursing home. You're renting the house out. You hold a security deposit. Nobody's got a real estate license. Where does that security deposit have to be? In a trust account. You don't know how to run a trust account? I'm so sorry. Figure it out. Because this law doesn't give any exceptions whatsoever. It says that any tenant security deposit in North Carolina that is held must be held in a trust account. That means they cannot touch the money. They cannot touch the money as long as the tenant is still where? In the property. A tenant security deposit in this state can never be touched by the landlord while the tenant is still in the property. And so here's what the penalty is if they don't hold it in a trust account. If you don't hold it in a trust account, you have no entitlement to the money, even if you would otherwise be entitled to it. So, like, what's the number one reason you think you'd be entitled to a tenant security deposit? They don't what? They don't pay rent. They didn't pay, they moved out, they owed you too much rent. Would you normally be entitled to keep their security deposit for that? Yes. If you didn't hold it in a trust account, you have no entitlement to the money. I mean, they can literally go to court after you've kept their security deposit, file a suit, walk into court and go, Mr. Magistrate, I did owe them too much rent. I didn't pay them. I want my security deposit back because they didn't have it in a trust account. You know what they're going to walk out of there with? The security deposit. Because the law is very explicitly clear that that security deposit has to be held in a trust account. Yes, ma'am, Z.
How do you verify the validity of a trust account for your landlord?
What do you mean, how do you verify the validity of it?
How do you find out if they're holding it in a trust account?
Because your lease has to specify, the Tenant Security Deposit Act says the lease has to specify the bank and the account number where the deposit is being held.
And if it doesn't do that?
Then it's in violation of the Tenant Security Deposit
The
Act.
lease has to say that.
Absolutely. So in theory, how do you verify it? You go to the bank.
So
You You go to the bank and you say, does this account number belong to this person, and does it have at least this much money in it, because that's the amount of my security deposit.
Well, I just did that, and they won't, I'm going through that right now, and the bank will not give me that information.
What bank won't give you that information?
Wells Fargo.
You have the account number?
Yes.
Okay, and they won't give you that information?
They said they can.
File a complaint with the North Carolina Commissioner of Banks. You'll have it in a hurry. But do me a favor, before you do that, go ask to speak with the bank manager, the branch manager, and especially since it's Wells Fargo, here's what I would recommend you say. I really don't think you want another encounter with the North Carolina Commissioner of Banks. Since the last one cost you $14 billion, I don't think you want another. They'll give you the information.
Yeah, I've spoken with them on numerous occasions just to verify if it's a trust account, and they say they cannot tell me that information.
Sure they can. Of course they can.
And I said, well, I'm calling because my landlord is supposed to hold my security deposit in this account, and I just need to know if this is
The trust account.
And they said I cannot give that information
Sure,
about her account.
sure they can. Not only can they, they're obligated by law to do so.
Walk up in there, girlfriend.
Yeah. You're just talking to the wrong person. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, because that person probably has no idea about what North Carolina law is, right? That person it's probably what they've been told to do by the bank, but the bank still has to operate under North Carolina law. So, okay? I get ugly sometimes, I have to. It works though. It's effective. It's effective. Okay? Are we good on this though? It's got to be held where? In a trust account, and it has to be held there the entire duration of the lease. You can, even if you're entitled to it, there are going to be times when the tenant is behind on their rent, but they're still there because you haven't gotten them to do what? To vacate or move out, or you haven't filed summary judgment. You cannot go in there and get the security deposit. How about if they knock a hole in a wall and you have to come in and spend $500 to fix it? Can you go into the security deposit and take that money out? No, not while they're still in the property. You can't, that's the whole point of the Tenant Security Deposit Act, is to say this money cannot be accessed or touched at any point in time during. Now you want to make a real nightmare for your landlord, talk about me being nasty, here's some nasty one. My guess is it's not a trust account. My guess is it's their primary checking account. If they're holding it in their primary checking account, not only are they not entitled to keep it, you're entitled to a full accounting of the account where it's being held. So when you go file at the county courthouse and for your security deposit, say, I would like a full accounting of Wells Fargo account number, this number, and they'll have to turn over you all of their bank records if that's their personal checking account. That'll teach them a lesson, won't it? Mm-hmm. Because you're entitled to an accounting of it. That's why it has to be in a segregated, separate account. That's the whole point of that. Because here's the thing. If I had a client pop up to me and say, can I see your accounting for your trust account? Should I have any objection whatsoever to giving that to them? No, it's not my money. What do I give a crap? Here it is. Here's exactly how much is in there. Here's where yours is deposited. Here's the money. Been there since it was put in. What else you want to know? That's the whole point of a trust account, though, is to keep it separated so it is easily identifiable like that. And see, what would be a real problem for somebody in a situation like yours is, what if that account balance has ever dipped below the amount of your security deposit? Now, not only have they not held it in the correct way, they've actually spent your money at some point, right? Even if they put it back, they spent it at some point if that account balance ever dropped below that amount. Does that make sense? You know, it stands to reason. If it was being held in trust, the account balance should never drop below that amount because it should have been there the whole time. Yes?
Is that a violation she could sue them for, or is that just
She just can get, if they're just a general member of the public, she just simply get her security deposit back. Which is, imagine what she wants anyway. But keep in mind, it's not going to cost them just giving her security deposit back. If she has to go to the extreme of actually filing a lawsuit to get it, it's going to cost them court costs and all those kinds of things as well. So I don't know why they would fight somebody on that. I mean, my guess is if they won't tell you, if they won't identify to you that it's a trust account, it's not. And that means they don't have a legal entitlement to it. And so I would probably give them one last chance. I would say, you know, you need to refund this or I'm gonna sue you. And they still won't?
So right now, she said, well, she has 30 days, she's on this way for 30 days, she's just been an ass.
Well, is she gonna refund it though at the end of 30 days?
That's her, and I have everything documented. She says that she has 30 days to refund it, so she's on
She does.
30 days. So I said, okay.
Okay,
I said, other than that, I'll see you in court.
there you go. She has 30 days, that is true. And that's probably coming up pretty soon on the slide, how long they have to account for it. Now, this Tenant Security Deposit Act also sets up limits on how much you can charge as a maximum security deposit. Now remember, earlier when we talked about the time periods, we were talking about notice time periods. Were those minimums or maximums? Those were minimums. These are maximums. When you talk about tenant security deposits and how much of a security deposit you can charge someone, these are maximum numbers. So here's what it boils down to. If you have a week-to-week tenancy, the maximum security deposit you can charge legally in North Carolina is 2 weeks. For a month-to-month tenancy, it's 1.5 months. And for anything longer than month-to-month, the maximum you can charge is 2 months. So you can never, under any circumstance in North Carolina, legally charge more than a 2-month security deposit. I'll tell you why this portion of the law exists. Unfortunately, when the Fair Housing Statutes first passed in 1968, and it became illegal to discriminate in the granting of housing on the basis of there were originally 4 protected classes, now there are 7. But security deposits became a very commonly used way to circumvent the anti-discrimination laws, because you could simply pick and choose how much you charge to different people. The best way to, you would never say to somebody, no, Jocelyn, I don't think you're a good fit. What you would say is, Jocelyn, we would love to have you. Now, there's a 1-year security deposit. And so if you cut us a check for that, and we'll get your lease application going. And of course, she's going to say, what? I don't have that kind of money. Well, I'm so sorry, it didn't work out. So that's why this portion of the law exists as a maximum, to simply say, here's the cap. You cannot go above this amount. Does that make sense for everybody? So under no circumstances can you charge more than that. Yes?
This is true with both.
This is true across the board. The Tenant Security Deposit Act that's a good question. The Tenant Security Deposit Act is true across the board, commercial or residential. Yes?
I was just gonna say, that's good law, because in San Francisco, they charge first, last, and security.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, this misnaming of things, first, last, and there's no such thing in North Carolina. If you are collecting more than the current month's rent, anything above that is a security deposit. Does that make sense? So when a tenant moves in North Carolina, what's the maximum amount you can collect from that tenant? 3. Because you could collect the first month's rent plus a 2-month security deposit. So the absolute maximum would be the equivalent of 3 months.
Which would honor the first month.
Right, that would be your first month's rent, which most likely you are going to collect. Most of the time when you process a tenant application now, you go ahead and collect the first month's rent, and if they're accepted, then you go ahead and apply the first month's rent. Even if they haven't moved in yet, you apply it toward that first month's rental period. That's very common as a property manager. Yes?
You said collect. Does that mean just charge? Like, people can just pay it all time?
Can they? Yes, they can. The tenant can choose to. The tenant can choose to pay in advance, but you can't force them to. So the maximum a landlord could force a tenant to pay would be the equivalent of 3 months rent, because they could charge the first month's rent and they could charge a maximum of a 2-month security deposit. Now, there's a very notable difference between calling it, because I've heard some landlords would say, well, we're doing that, we're just charging first month's rent, last month's rent, and a 1-month security deposit. No. Because that means they're only holding how much in that trust account? 1 month. If you're collecting 3 months worth of rent up front, how much has to be in the trust account? 2 months. You're holding 2 months as the security deposit. There's a difference there. There's a difference there, because the landlord's not allowed to touch. And here should be a warning flag to you as a tenant in this state. If you ever are allowed to write 1 check for security deposit, rent, all of it. I'm not saying it's automatically being done wrong. I'm saying there's a very high likelihood it's being done incorrectly, because almost no upstanding property managers who know what they're doing with the law keep rents and security deposits in the same trust account. You can, but almost nobody does. We almost all have separate accounts for them. Does that make sense for everybody? So if I had a tenant moving in and they were paying the first month's rent and they were paying a 1 month security deposit, how many checks do I need from them? 2, because I need one for the rent and one for the security deposit, because they go in 2 different directions. So that's a warning flag to look out for, especially if you're ever writing a check out for a security deposit in this state. What word should be on the check? Trust or escrow. Whatever you're making the account, it shouldn't be a person's name, it should be trust. It could be person's name and trust, but it should say trust if it's a security deposit, because that's where it can be legally held. So in some cases, you can go back yourself and see if your tenant security deposit's being held on a trust account. Go back and look at your canceled check. See how you made the check out. Does it have the word trust account on it? Probably not. So what does that tell you? Is it being held? Personal checking account. There you go. Does that make sense to everybody?
So in that instance, Travis, because she's not legally responsible,
Holding it.
holding it, do I have to wait 30 days?
Yes, you still have to wait the 30 days. I mean, no magistrate's going to even hear the thing before you've waited the 30 days, because you get flooded with stuff. Right. So wait 30 days. If she hasn't refunded it, then simply file a complaint, and you'll have to go to court and you'll have to prove and say, here's where I wrote the check. Notice it doesn't say trust on the check I wrote. I've asked numerous times for proof that it is a trust account. They won't provide it to me. So you ask them, because they have to answer your questions.
Being that she's getting a security deposit back in that manner, does that mean she has to move out, or she just...
She's already out.
Oh, okay.
She's already out. You can't ask for your security deposit back while you're still in the property. Yeah. Okay, we all good on this? As far as the maximum goes? Yep.
Say the tenant pays 2 months security deposit,
Mm-hmm.
and then the landlord says the tenant asks the landlord if they can apply 1 month towards rent. Can they do that?
No. No, because it can't be touched until what? Until you vacate the property. Now, what could happen, presumably, is you could renegotiate the lease. In other words, you could sign a new lease that specifies the tenant security deposit is now 1 month, and the landlord could refund the 1 month additional security deposit, and then the tenant could pay it back. But it would have to go through that process to be clean. Now, obviously, magistrates deal with this stuff all the time because they're dealing with people who don't know the law. Are they probably going to accept that? They'd say, yeah, don't do it that way in the future, but we understand what you were trying to do here. Okay. As far as what we can use a security deposit for, there are some things which are pretty obvious. Unpaid rent. Now remember, we can use it for that, but only when? After the tenant has what? Vacated the property, not while the tenant's still there. Damage to the property, anything above ordinary wear and tear. That's also what we're going to talk about in just a second. Damage is not wear and tear. Yes, there are some gray areas here, but the statute itself is pretty specific. So if you ever want to go look it up, it is very specific about what it defines as damage versus wear and tear. Breaking the lease, so non-fulfillment of the lease would be a reason to charge a security deposit. Cost of cleanup and storage of their stuff. Cost of re-renting the property if they broke the lease. Now you can't charge them for the cost of re-renting the property if they fulfilled the lease. But if they broke the lease or left early, you could charge a security deposit for cost of re-renting the property. Now, as far as the accounting goes, as Xenia said, they have 30 days. The landlord has 30 days in North Carolina to provide a full accounting to the tenant of what has been done with their security deposit, whether it has been used or whether it's being refunded or some portion of it being used, but a full accounting has to come within 30 days. One of the most common mistakes that landlords make is having a tenant move out and the tenant knows they owe that security deposit. Maybe they owe a month's rent. Maybe they've even discussed, okay, well, don't pay rent the last month and we'll just keep your security deposit. Does that happen sometimes? Yes. You still have to send the accounting, folks. You're not legally entitled to that money if you don't send the accounting within how many days? 30 days. So even if you've talked about it with the tenant, when they move out and you do take that security deposit because of the unpaid rent, send the accounting. And I've had people say, well, I don't know where they went. Send it to the last address you have on file for them, which in many cases means you're mailing it to where? Yourself, and that's okay. As long as you can prove that you made an attempt to send them the accounting within 30 days. Because if you don't, you're not entitled to the money. Even if you otherwise would be, you lose your entitlement to the money. That's the best way to think of it. You lose your entitlement to the money if you don't provide the accounting. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, so 30 days to do that. I've given you some examples here of what differences between damage and wear and tear are. Remember, you can charge a security deposit for damage. You cannot charge a security deposit for wear and tear. Here's one of the most common points of confusion, I think, for students with this. Can you have a lease that specifies you be responsible for other cleanup costs, things that would ordinarily be considered wear and tear, like shampooing the carpet? Can your lease specify you're responsible for that? Yes. That does not mean, however, the landlord can deduct that cost from what? From the security deposit. Those are two entirely different things. They can bill you separately for that cost, but they would still have to refund your security deposit in full if there was no other reason to deduct from the security deposit. So, what I mean is, let's say my lease says that the tenant's got to have the carpets shampooed on the way out, and I don't do that. And it costs the landlord $200 to have the carpet shampooed. They have to still refund my security deposit in full, because shampooing the carpets is not an allowable deduction from a security deposit in North Carolina. Does that make sense for everybody? When they send me the check for my security deposit, can they also send me a bill for the $200? Yes, but it has to be handled or accounted for separately, because the Security Deposit Act is very clear about what you can charge a security deposit for. Does that make sense? So you can't ever go outside of these rules. So like, for example, look at the wear and tear. Dirty carpet. Well, there it is right there. That's considered what? Wear and tear, and therefore cannot be deducted from a security deposit. Now I'm going to tell you a little secret about carpet. If as a landlord or property manager you start wanting to charge a security deposit for carpet, you better be ready to document the age of that carpet. Because most magistrates, and there's no rule set in stone, but most of them that I have encountered use the IRS's depreciation schedule for most things when they consider what value they have. And the IRS depreciation schedule for carpet is 7 years. What that means is that the IRS says that carpet goes from 100% of its value to 0% of its value in what period of time? 7 years. So if you're making a claim against a tenant, let's say their dog ripped up the carpet. Would ripping up the carpet fall under damage? Yes. So yes, you can deduct that from the security deposit. But if that tenant pushes back and they challenge you and they file that suit, and you go in there and the magistrate says, well, how old was the carpet? Well, I'm not really sure. The house was built in 1995. I've never replaced it. The magistrate's going to look at you and say, well, it's a good time to replace it now, and the tenant shouldn't have to pay for that. Does that make sense for everybody? So you have to be very particularly careful with charging for carpet, because in general, carpet is viewed as one of those things that has a very limited lifespan anyway. And it really isn't about the condition of the carpet when the tenant moves in, it's more about the age of it. Because could you have some people that have 20-year-old carpet that's in fantastic shape? Yeah, absolutely. And if the tenant tears it up, they're probably not going to be entitled to any damages for it just because of its age. Because the way the law looks at that is, if before you rent it out to the next tenant, you should have been doing what anyway? Replacing the carpet because of its age. Because they would look at it as an age-based thing. You know, the same thing with paint that's cracked or peeling. You never can charge a tenant for that, because a magistrate's going to say, well, when they moved out, you should have been doing what anyway? Repainting. So that's where you have to be careful with, you know, with this idea of damage. Large holes in the wall, drawing on the wall, so if you have artists in the family, you can be charged for that. Unauthorized paint colors, so if the tenant repaints without permission or they paint in colors that are not authorized, then repainting could be, obviously. Stains and burns on carpet, assuming it's not more than 7 years old in most cases. Broken windows, all those things. Excessive filth. Now I will say, excessive filth, it better be excessively filthy. There is no real written in stone rule. But I've seen magistrates who look at pictures of something that I would have said, oh my God, that's filthy. And they're like, no, this is not too bad. No, oof, okay. All right, so what I will say is if you're going to try to deduct money from a security deposit for excessive filth, we need to be talking like an episode of Hoarders type thing, you know, like really bad. Yes?
So that 7-year carpet thing, for example, the 1-year lease is included with that 7 years, so the 7-year would not count.
It's from when the carpet was installed.
When the carpet was installed, not to when the tenant moved in, but to
When they move out, right. In other words, the lifespan of the carpet's 7 years. Yeah, that's right. And and the reason they have those kinds of general rules of thumb is because sometimes we have tenants that stay in these residential properties for 8 or 10 years. You know, the same tenant does. And they move out, and then the landlord tries to deduct from their security deposit costs for carpet and costs for paint. And basically, the magistrates are just going to look at that and say, all of these were things that you should have been planning to do. When you had a tenant in here for this many years anyway, you can't possibly charge them for something you should have been doing no matter what. Apartment complexes are notorious for violating this, by the way. Apartment complexes are terrible because what apartment complexes realize is that the vast majority of people do not know what you can charge against a tenant security deposit, and they never push back, right? And so they'll send you the breakdown of your security deposit within the 30 days, and well, you know, we had to recaulk your tub, and that was $125. Well, first of all, that's a plumbing repair, right? Who's responsible for that? The landlord is. But most people don't want to push back. What I'll tell you is most of the time if you write them a nicely worded letter back and send them a copy of the Tenant Security Deposit Act, you'll get a check pretty quickly. Okay, everybody good on that?
They too are supposed to follow this.
Yes, there are no exceptions to the Tenant Security Deposit Act. Everybody who's leasing these properties has to follow the same set of rules. Yep, whether they're licensed or not. And then finally, last thing here is the Vacation Rental Act. The Vacation Rental Act it probably should just be called the Short-Term Rental Act, because it doesn't really apply to only vacation properties, though this is the way we've chosen to term it in North Carolina. It's really about short-term rentals. Here's the thing. You need to understand, a rental is a rental in the eyes of the state. What is the only legal mechanism for getting a tenant out who doesn't want to leave? What do we call it? Summary ejectment, right? And how long do we say it takes? 45 days. Imagine if you're leasing this for a week at Emerald Isle. If you're the property manager and you lease this thing for $8,000 a week, is that a reasonable number at Emerald Isle, by the way, during the season? Sure. So you lease this thing for $8,000 for the week at Emerald Isle, and your tenant won't leave. Do you want to have to go through a 45-day process to evict said tenant from that property? No. How about checking out of a hotel? You won't leave a hotel. Do they want to have to spend 45 days evicting you from that property? They would if this law didn't exist. This law is what exempts those short-term rentals from the summary ejectment process. Does that make sense for everybody? The only thing this law accomplishes is what we call expedited eviction, fast eviction, usually same-day eviction. For example, if you're leasing this property for a week in Emerald Isle and that tenant won't leave, you call the sheriff's department or the police department and they're going to show up, and when's the tenant going to have to leave? Right then. No playing around, no going to court, pleading your case. by because of the Vacation Rental Act. So is it important, do you think, that if you lease these kind of properties, you know how to stay in compliance with this law? You know how to be labeled a vacation rental. So here's how you get labeled a vacation rental. The tenants must be renting the property for no longer than how long? 90 days. That is the maximum lease on one of these properties. So you're not leasing the property for more than 90 days. That's number one. Number two, you must verify that the tenant has a permanent residence somewhere else. The idea is that you're going to be doing what quickly? Kicking them out, sending them home, which means you got to verify they have a what? A home to go to. So if you're going to want to be labeled a vacation rental property, what should your lease have a place for on it? Home address. And are you going to want to verify that with their driver's license, for example, to make sure those match up? Because again, the law puts the responsibility on the landlord to verify this person has a home address. And the law, court cases have been very clear, precedent's been clear that simply getting their home address and verifying that that matches their ID is enough of a verification step. Yes, ma'am, Jim.
What if they're homeless?
What if they're homeless? Again, what should your lease specify?
Go back under the bridge.
They list what? They list what?
An address.
They list their home address. That's exactly right.
So
Now-
even if they make something up and you don't verify
But
it.
you got to verify with what? If they make something up, it should also be on what? On their ID, on their driver's license. So if you've done that, you've covered yourself. Now, if they put on their NA, what should you do with this person? Don't lease to them. Don't lease to them because you simply say, I'm sorry, we're a vacation rental. You have to have a home address for us to lease to you. Because otherwise what you're going to end up with is a tenant that, in order to evict them, takes how long? 45 days. So you got to be very careful of that. All right, so no longer than 90 days and verify that they have a place to go when you kick them out. There are other little intricacies about this rule, but you don't need to know them for your purposes on a pre-license exam. Obviously, this comes into play if you ever end up practicing real estate at the beach or in the mountains. That's where this is most likely to happen. But do we have a new phenomenon going on now where other properties are being leased for short periods of time? Airbnb, VRBO, those websites that do that, those properties would presumably fall under the Vacation Rental Act as long as their leases are in compliance with the the Vacation Rental Act. Does that make sense for everybody? All right, that's all for Chapter 11. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go ahead and take your lunch break. Come back at 1:35, and then we'll cover property management. I haven't gotten it yet. Okay. I'm probably just going. There's one on my desk. I don't have one in here.
Freezing. Colder than normal. That's what I think of that. I told her, she said,
I love Conky, Kaze. There's another one, like near last time I went with the guy that really talked to me, so I wasn't too happy, so I was like trying to engage him. Like the last time he was not being.
He was like hilarious. He asked my daughter if she cooked, and she was like, no. He was like, come here, I'm gonna teach you something.
Are you serious? That is awesome.
He had him cooking an egg with a spatula.
Are you serious? I know
Her
she wants to
boyfriend
go
did
back.
never go to a Japanese steakhouse.
So that has to be awesome.
Yes.
Oh my god.
That tolerance,
When you went home.
yeah. But you said it's like detox, right?
Yeah. And then fast.
Because I want this going.
I can't make that at work. So I was trying it out this morning.
But see, I'm off all this week.
Well, I'm fine.
This is like a break.
Yeah, I can't take that. I see y'all later.
Oh,
Yeah, some sleep.
yeah, see how she does it. I don't see how she does it. Just like, she's just getting off. We ain't gotta come over here. She's just getting off.
Oh, she working?
They just make weight man.
Oh, she working, she just got
When she works Thursday, she come here on Sundays, so she just got off the road. Oh, I don't know how to be able to do that.
I guess it's just the only time you can take it, because you think about it, she probably can't take it during the week.
Then when you do take it at night, you gotta come more often, so.
Yeah, think about it, she work during the week. Where you going? I'm sitting up here.
Oh, I ate already.
Huh? I got something to eat. I'm not feeling right, so I'm sitting up here with my meat pad and shit. I got my pens and
She
things.
left, so I'm picking up food at 12. I ordered it
Got
on
my
my
pens
phone and
and
paid
shit.
for it,
I
so.
had so much going on this
I said,
weekend.
ready.
My girlfriend came from Dallas, she stayed, then my play nephew came over, then my niece came from out of town. It's just like, I couldn't get, you know, huh?
Yeah.
And then my friend came up, I was doing her dances and for 4 hours yesterday. Girl, look, I know, huh? Look, I got this plugged in. And when I get out, and then my girlfriend, the one I go visit on Sundays,
She's not around.
no, she want me to come over for dinner and she fix, you know. Where you
I ain't
going?
have to cook. I think I'll be leaving, going over there.
I'm gonna,
Here, you.
thank you. Water
She
is,
a story, so she be up there doing all this for me now.
no. Is take a
It's all
shower
even.
and then put some oil and some gel. Yeah.
Natural.
I
I
did.
don't have no perm, so that's why.
But see, she doing that now, but her hair is like straight
Yeah, my hair
sometimes.
is maybe a little shorter than yours. But it's growing. I don't know what it is now because, you know, it's all
Yeah, that's what I said,
this
it
is packed
looks
down.
like- Yeah, she do that like this.
All right.
But she's got a narrow face that works for her.
She like one of them Barbie doll faces and
Oh,
stuff.
I can't
She
get
got
out the
one
building
of them,
now.
you know,
My
them
head is
Barbie
gonna
doll in
be
the
too
box
big
and
now.
stuff.
Where's your boy that throws stuff, people stuff?
Who? Oh, he must not be in it. But
Food boy.
we assume he didn't do the test.
Wow. You should. You know you got it. All right, I'm heading out. You don't want anything?
No, I bought a hot dog, but I don't know if I'm going in there and eat it. I'll be right here in this corner warming up. Aren't you cold?
No.
You don't have a vent over there under y'all?
I'm not.
Oh, you don't have a vent over you, huh?
No.
That's
but
what, see?
I'm not cold today.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
But see, this thing is just blowing right here. I'm glad I bought my thing.
Yeah, you see my coat?
What'd he say?
And I have left.
And she don't even have on no clothes on her. She got a towel.
Damn,
Right,
and stuff.
yeah.
My neck is feeling like, woo.
I can't believe she ain't cold. I thought she was
I
gonna.
don't know what's going on
Hey,
today.
I thought you was gonna ask for my blanket. It's gray. It match your outfit. I'm the one with all these dumb colors
I know,
back here.
it's funny.
Huh?
It's funny today, I'm not cold.
So now
I'm
I'm
not
gonna
cold
be
today.
in trouble for
I
not
saw you
telling
and I
her
said, I
that
know
they
she's
were
gonna come need the
leaving.
blanket.
But,
You know, but it matches your outfit though. It's great.
you know, like, decided not to, you know, it's like,
I go for a banana split.
I know, but it was like,
Oh,
oh, I
yeah.
didn't tell her, I'm like, I told you, you just didn't
Oh,
remember, you
oh.
know, like.
Ice cream? Oh, yeah, I love ice cream.
Hey, do not come back and I have to make music like her because I'll be back here. All in the bathroom.
See, it doesn't bother me. Ice
That's one of the ones I gotta have
doesn't
at
make
home.
me-
Yeah, huh?
It makes my husband and my
Because
son
I'm
go.
sitting up in here. I mean, if I had a banana split, when I come back here, I think we got another 4 hours.
Even Michael,
Oh,
you know,
honey, it wouldn't do
he was
nothing
so
to me.
really good
But
about.
my oldest son and my husband, less than
Lactose,
10,
yeah.
less than 10 minutes, they going.
I had some chocolate, double chocolate chip. My friend gave me that. Go get it off me. Shit, I had like 3 or 4 teaspoons. I was like all night.
Oh, wow.
So if you want
No, I do, I mean, I
for
do
me,
send my kids.
I don't need none of that. I can eat some certain kind of ice cream. That dog, that stuff
just
is
like
yes,
me.
What'll happen is I'll send them all a
I
text.
need to do the same thing she do.
She said she lost some of her weight. But I ain't for one to become running to no damn bathroom.
Yeah, we can do
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
I
she's
just didn't
not,
want
she
to
said she's
do
not
it.
comfortable going in there
It
using it.
doesn't matter.
Like that.
I don't even want to be running back and forth at home every 5 minutes.
You don't feel like.
Then I
But
start
at least at
hurting
home, you can just drop down, you ain't gotta worry about
You can.
putting paper all around the commode and doing all that.
Think about this. I ain't trying to be funny, but you at home and yes, you are doing it, but like, why your booty won't be hurt? Damn, you know I feel bad.
Yeah, I know. You be like, oh, don't let it come because it hurts.
If you know what diarrhea does to you. That's like diarrhea. And you constantly going to the bathroom, you gotta get the toilet.
And she said she was in last night.
Well, I'm going to the bathroom, when I just see, my tears be up right there. I hurt myself.
What he got the air on today? Oh, he in the 60s. No, normally it's like 71. He got it on 69.
I don't think you want to decide sleep.
How Oh yeah, he took everything.
I just texted her back.
No, I can't tell.
Well, I think she's gonna come with his dog. I mean, if she doesn't, I can always bring him home one day too, you know, like.
Oh, with the paper she said. She said. Yeah. And she said.
And my thing is, in a way, I feel like he might be better there just because he's not gonna play as much, but like he's good, but he doesn't go upstairs. Like, you know, he's helping him down at this point.
Yeah, it hit me twice, but she's.
Just make sure you have Brett, because I don't know if the date was on the birthday, Sarah. Or actually, well, I was gonna say, let's get yourself in the role. Just,
Then all of a sudden you open up your phone, and then you took over.
Yeah. And I'm not too sure about it.
yeah.
You wouldn't come.
Yeah, but I couldn't tell.
Yeah. Oh, that food was so good.
Yeah, but I don't know if the bread's gonna.
What'd you have?
You know,
Calypso shrimp linguine.
Oh, that's it.
Oh, it was so good.
What kind of sauce was it?
I'm not sure what kind of sauce it is.
Was it like tomatoey or was it
Uh-huh.
like spicy?
It's spicy, but I see some. I don't know. It might be peppers.
I
It's
ate my
spicy. I know that.
Sounds good.
It's called the mother.
Huh?
And I figured I better come back and go over my little test, so, since he didn't take it up yet.
Please don't take it up though.
And he taking it up after we went.
Must be.
I'm gonna look it over again before. How you feel about it?
I thought I was prepared, but then I saw that thing and I was like, oh no, you're not prepared.
You spent a lot of time.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I did.
Girl, I tried to rush through mine last night.
So I don't feel comfortable with 7, 8, and 9. So
Yes.
I'm comfortable with 1 through 6. So I'm gonna go back over 7, 8, and 9.
What's 7, 8, 9?
The contracts and all that stuff, option to purchase and all that.
Oh, yeah. And there was another.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with this landlord leasing because that's what I do every day. I've been doing it for like
Okay.
since I was 19.
So you got that down.
But
Well, this is my question about the rental deposit. I thought it was 60 days to return the money.
30 days.
30 days to
30 days.
return the money. And what's the 60 days for?
I don't know if I
You can do 60 days. You can charge security deposit, 2 months security deposit, which is 60
Well,
days.
on here it says something about 60 days.
You can just go ahead and put.
Temporary accounting can be provided at 30 days for the final accounting eliminated 60 days after the tenant vacates. So 60 days is for the accounting and the money, or just for the accounting? Because if you already
It must be
gave them
accounting,
the
'cause
money,
you got-
but if you already gave them the money, what's the purpose of giving them?
Another 30 days?
Yeah.
Well, you got to give them their money within 30 days. So if not, tell them how their money was spent towards damages or
Well, it
non-payment
says
of
you have
rent.
to tell them, give them the accounting within 30 days. Their deposit. Right, more than 30 days from the day they move out. already refunded their money. What's the purpose of giving them this again for this?
Okay, at 30
It
days.
says 30 days to refund in writing, no more than 30 days from the day they move in. And then, if final numbers aren't available at 30 days,
Which you still have to give them that within 30 days.
still have
And
to
then if
give
you
them
don't have
money.
time, that's on you.
So
That's
go
not
ahead
on the tenant.
Okay, go ahead and give them their money, and then you still have another 30 days to provide
To get it,
the
yeah.
county law.
But you gotta give it to them. Some tenants know the law. Out of all the ones I've ever had, I know one who knew the law.
Only one knew, and she wanted her money on time.
Yeah, if you didn't give it to her, she'd be going to court asking for 3 times that amount.
Yeah, really?
3 times the security deposit amount if you don't provide that.
And she knew she could request it.
Well,
that means she been renting places or leasing places for a
She
long
know how
time.
to get up because she done it before.
Well, unless she
Yeah.
took this class with,
Because I parked right there when I came in, and then I break, I had to break with my red bull.
And the guy that I work for, he, the rental payments, when somebody come in and pay their rent, and the security deposit all goes into one account. He's old school, he don't believe in change. You know, he said it's not good to have those 2 accounts together, and my boss, he puts them together.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at the temperature. It's on. I told her, I said, normally it's in the 70s.
Yeah.
Like 70 or
Last week it
71.
was 69 also. I thought about putting it up.
Yeah. So he keep itching down on it, itching down.
I noticed that at home too, though, the past couple weeks. Because I used to get cold if it was like 76, and now I've been turning it down like 75, 74.
Okay.
But then again, my parents were there, and I know they like it cold, so I've just been,
Dealing with it.
yeah, sitting under
That's
the
the way it
blanket.
is in my house with my husband
Yeah.
and my oldest son. They like it on like 71, 72. I'm like, please, I put the thing on 75, 76.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause I mean, and then my husband and my oldest son, they'll be bundled up. I'm like, well, don't put the blanket on you.
My daughter went to sleep last night with a long flannel pajamas and pants on. I said, are you really going to sleep like that? Because now I got to turn the air down. She's like, no, I'm fine. I'm fine.
That's why I have to be in my house too, dealing with those two. And then my 7-year-old, he does not like to wear shoes, so he would jump in my bed, and I'm like, boy, your feet are as cold as ice.
Yeah. My husband likes to trick my daughter. He'll tap her on the shoulder, like even if he's on that side, he'll tap her here. So one time I tapped her. She's like, I know that was Mom because it was cold hands.
I'm going to go back over 7, 8, 9. I still don't feel comfortable with those 2 chapters.
I haven't done my note course since like chapter 5, so I gotta go back. I did a few, but not like as many as I did the first 4, like when I was like, I guess I'm gonna like focus on that. And I usually do the book questions, but I didn't do chapter 10 since I was doing the midterm.
Okay.
So that I was gonna try to do that this week, but now we're gonna have 4 chapters, so I was like, oh, my daughter goes back to school next week, and I don't have Jonathan, so it's all
I'm off Friday this week. Well, all this week.
Yeah.
My My son starts school on the 27th. 7-year-old.
Which school does he go to?
He'll be going to ACOP. I went outside my school district. I did it legally. I put in a request.
Oh,
and
you
the
got put in
reason
a
why-
request?
Yeah, and the reason why I wanted to change.
Why? Oh, too many teachers, not enough teachers.
The teacher at his old school does not have a good passing rate for preparing the kids to go from second grade to third grade. Her passing rate is not good, so. And plus the bathrooms are nasty.
Wait a minute. So how far you have to drive?
Oh, it's about the same distance,
Oh.
because I take him to school.
You have to take the bus
Yeah.
to come get him. Well, you'll get him.
Well, I took him, even when he was in his school district, I still took him to school. So I just take him on my way to work, and if I don't have to work, I'll just go and exercise, and work out until it's 4 hours before I come back.
Right. Did he collect the test?
Last week he said he was gonna agree into lunch.
Yeah, my body's
His
up.
lunch, but
People asking crazy questions. I mean, when he does that, he has to stop.
Right.
And he loses his train of thought. You can see when he loses his train of thought.
So, like, people don't be asking me no dumb questions right now. I gotta do this.
It's like he's always looking for ways to break the law. Just follow the law and let the law apply to you. You know what I'm
It's the
saying?
most bizarre stuff.
Yes. I'm like, he's always trying to get around something. Yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
I don't like when people think that they're so much smarter than the law. Just follow the rules and not think that you're different.
He's just gonna get himself in trouble.
Yes, yes.
What she said?
He's gonna get himself in trouble trying to find a way around the rules.
That's what it looked like.
My sister's like that. I have a sister that's like that. She think rules apply to everybody but her.
That drives me crazy.
Yes. And then every job that she goes to, she got an issue with, I mean, she done had at least 30 jobs, and she got an issue with the 30 people on the job.
And it's hard.
So I'm like, don't you think this is a pattern? Can you see that the problem is not, the problem is you, not the 30 people, or the 30 jobs.
I feel like that too. The one that called me last time, she's not there too. She can't keep a job.
Cannot
It's
keep a
always
job.
about somebody else.
It's all?
Is it?
She said it's green.
I don't remember coming over here turning it off.
Me either.
Travis, you didn't heard all the conversation. She was in there taking forever to I said, what did you get? I said, why you gonna bring a thing in here like this, knowing this class and just leave like in the freezer? You should just let it thaw out.
Let it thaw out. So when it's time for you to eat lunch, it'll be.
Oh, she didn't. She heard. She just saying, you bring something.
You have ants all over you.
Bringing the stuff up like that. You gotta use the microwave. Bringing it from. Why would you put stuff in the freezer? Isn't it going to school? And it's already cold. It's just like if you go into the grocery store, get it. You ain't going straight home. It ain't even that frozen in the grocery store because the grocery store, the temperature's not as bad as when you take it home. You put something in that freezer right there, it's frozen. Cause I just put my ice pack in there.
Good temperature. Woo. I'm afraid to miss one day. I'm not missing any days unless something's major going on.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I said. Maybe these people on their second date, because it's true. Right, a lot of missed people in the day. We're not even halfway there.
Yeah,
I think so.
yeah.
To be halfway there for so many people to go, you still got another halfway to go.
It allows you to eat as well.
We wait for you to bring dessert. What's the minimum range
Getting
pie?
it right now.
All right, I'm waiting for it. Bring me a
Going to
slice.
the bakery right now. Cake's not done yet.
Oh, doggone it.
Another 20 minutes.
You gotta be in the refrigerator for a while, right?
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that. Man, what does he need a microphone for? Oh, my God.
Mom,
The speakers over there, I'm hearing that all over the building.
I know, huh? You know, he said he's losing his voice.
Okay. Tenant Security Act.
Oh, so he knows.
I know all about it.
Oh my God.
Oh my gosh. Mandy, we have Mandy, we have Jody.
You
No
know you
name
gonna take-
and no name. You have no names. It's all right.
Well, he knows by heart. He's that good. He knows everybody's name. Learned it in a week.
Really? Are you cold back here? I see you.
Yeah.
70, I usually put on like 65.
Oh my God.
Oh, they don't went to 70?
That's all right.
I thought it was 65.
Hey, warm up. How late do you go today? 5 o'clock. That's
Oh.
one day.
Thanks
A
for
lot of
the
information to climb into, like 8 hours worth of stuff.
thanks for the encouragement. Now you're really making us feel good. We got it.
I feel confident that you can do it.
That we can stay awake.
Either one. Go to sleep, they give you intravenous, and in the word, all the stuff will come
You
in.
know he's not gonna let us go to sleep because that's why he got it on 62.
Oh, I know. And if he sees you closing your eyes, he'll be. And by the way, oh yeah,
Yeah.
he throws stuff. Throws erasers.
But you know what? I don't close my eyes. Man. I'm too cold.
Just
to
get
close
one of
my
those
eyes.
glasses that have eyes painted on them. Just like that.
I bet you know who's not in this class and who didn't show up today too.
Oh, I'm sure he does. Good at what he does. He tells you all the good stories and tries to make you understand things. Heard about the carpet. I heard it. I was in the other room. I heard about it. The carpet's appreciated over 7 years, according to the tax department. And so, hold on, I got it. I got
I mean, he really did hear the
it.
conversation.
I heard him. I swear to God, I heard him. I had my door closed. Oh my word.
Well, you got the microphone for him.
I do think he's the best teacher that's out there.
Yep.
I did a lot of research before I chose this.
I did too. I did too.
I have a girlfriend.
I checked everybody's percentage rate, the passing
Yes.
rate and everything.
I have a girlfriend. She took it 5 times.
My friend in Charlotte told me to take it with him. She's like, I wish you did post licensing because me and my friend would come and stay to do.
Don't he
classes
do
with
it?
him. I didn't see any online.
Well, he already did it. He did them in
But he
does
some,
do.
yeah.
It just he probably finished him up the last class. He was real busy. I can tell you this. This is my second time taking the class. I took the last class, and he was doing all those post licenses. Just people, because of June 10th, all those things that
Trying to get them
More
completed.
places, so some of the but I'm getting more out of this one. He's spending more time because he was so all over the place. I'm getting more the second time.
What do you have around your neck and shoulders?
It's a heating pad.
Okay. It looks comfortable.
TJ Maxx.
I've never seen anything like
I
that.
haven't
I
either.
had one like
I'm like,
this.
where did she find all this stuff at?
Girl, got one, another one in Simmons, another big one. TJ Maxx, like $24. Boy, if y'all looking for one for the winter. And I got this about, when I had my surgery, I was getting everything. Like I got tens, machine, this. But it actually, for your shoulders and stuff, instead of me trying to wrap it, I found this at TJ Maxx.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. It's a moist heat one too. I mean, moist. I guess you put a towel and under it. And then I take it, I might put it around my legs, one thigh. If I'm at home, I'll put it up against one of my pillow.
That's a good idea.
My
too, for
recliner.
places where you can't have space heaters and it's cold like this. Yeah, that's a good idea.
What did you get from Bahama Breeze?
Empanadas.
Okay.
The only thing I like at Bahama Breeze is their drinks. I love going in there drinking.
The one in the pineapple?
Huh?
The one in the pineapple?
Is that a drink? What's the name of it?
I don't know. They
Really?
serve it in the pineapple though. It's amazing.
What's in it? Rum or? Really?
I get the non-alcoholics.
Me too.
Well, I'm not gonna lie. Did you hear me say, give me another shot? So, I haven't been over there. That's why I don't go over there because, lunch or my girlfriend wanted to meet over there today. I got a good excuse. I said, girl, it's gonna be raining because I want to go home. I haven't really drank since I'm taking this class.
I just hate to start closing up so early.
Bahama Breeze? Like in the day, during the night? They used to stay up until when?
She said they used to stay until 11.
Really?
Oh, it's so cold right
Is there shooting there or somebody? Yeah, my husband said that.
Oh, really? Is that why?
Okay. You said happy hour?
Oh.
Okay. That's the key, I guess. They give you an hour for happy hour and then it's time to go home.
They don't even have happy hour out here, right? They don't even. What do they call it? They don't call it. It's against the law.
Okay.
Well, they can't call it something. I know when I first moved here, all twisted. But anyway, yeah. So happy hour in California is a real happy hour. You got hors d'oeuvres. Go for the food and the $2 drinks.
I've never even gotten drunk in my life, so I don't know how.
I don't know about getting drunk. I've gotten a little tipsy, but I don't think I've ever
I
gotten
haven't even been
drunk.
tipsy.
You just go with some good, nice people that don't drink.
Me?
That's all. That's
I'm always a designated driver, and I'm not gonna do anything where it gives anybody a chance to take advantage of it.
So you
I stay straight.
you was the one in high school, the good girl.
Yeah.
I would love you to be my friend.
My sister and I went to Bahamas, and we made a pact. One night she'll drink, the next night I'll drink. So we both can have, a good time.
That was the last time you drank? What the fuck?
No, she got drunk both nights, so I had to stay sober.
You both supposed to be drinking. We go to the Bahamas. I miss my Bahama trip. Me and my friends been going to the Bahamas every year for the last 10, 11 years. And we all get,
Well, see, first of all, we got on the elevator and she was stumbling. And so the guy that was about to get off saw her stumbling. So he gets back on the elevator. I guess they drunk, so I'm going to take advantage of him or what have you. So when he got back on the elevator, I looked at him like, go ahead and make a move. Cause I was straight, I hadn't been drinking,
Right.
you know. He got right off.
We don't get that. I don't get that. Yeah, your sister was drunk. I just might drink 1 or 2 drinks and we go.
No,
We don't
she was
get-
gone.
Yeah, I don't do that.
She
That's
made it
not
to the
even out of
room.
country.
When we got to the
I don't know
room,
what's ever since that Natalie Holloway
she
stuff.
she was throwing up all over the place.
No, see, that's crazy. Yeah, especially out of the country.
Yeah.
You don't know what they put in your drink. She said somebody died.
That's why I said, you know, he was about to get off and he saw her stumbling and leaning up against the elevator and everything. So he gets back on, you know, he might have figured, well, they'll go in the room, they may forget to lock the door or just come on in right behind us before we can even close the door, you know. Yes. That's why I don't give anybody a chance. I'm going to say something. It was you drinking, you just didn't know I wasn't.
Really simple must be a virgin.
Coming in here holding that thing like he holding the pizza.
Is it cold in here or is it just me?
No, it's cold.
It's cold, okay.
Why is there no internet? It was only a few, so, but I got all the ones.
Hello?
It turned. I'm trying to make sure I did good. I'm progressive, but I was just so busy. But I finally got finishing.
He hasn't been drinking that much.
Well, I didn't get a chance to really go back.
Yeah, well, that's also all the medication.
Yeah, I was up there. That's exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm going back to the.
Go ahead and give him this button. I'm not making any more changes.
You turning it in? Did he come back? He picked him up?
Oh.
More than one answer that wants to choose
the ground?
to choose the most fitting answer to the language statement.
Did he give you guys in that passport?
Oh, I don't know.
He wrote it up there in there. Thought I had
I'm
already.
not confident.
I can text him later and just ask
You know what I
him
mean?
what
Like,
he
I'm
said.
pretty sure that I did enough by, but I'm not confident. I'm not like 100% satisfied. Not with this, you're right, not with this stuff. You know, I think that's basically it, because in my mind, it's such a racket. It's like everybody and their best friend would be real estate agents if they made it easy. You know, because of the kind of how easy it is.
It's not in
The
there.
past 10 years, we're going on fiasco, yeah.
Wow. Really? What did you get in it?
The other man that came in here, what is he with?
Where'd you get recently? What else?
CD card.
Okay.
Oh, that's it? Only? You must have been pretty good then. No, I don't wanna get excited. I'll see you when I get there. Bye, see you later. Bye.
That's probably the best thing to do.
Lord.
That is the best thing to do.
The escrow account or trust account, if you're collecting rent as an agent for the property owner, it's like if you're a property manager and pays you rent.
Yeah, she did, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like to the property owner, yeah, to your client. Okay. That's what I had. No. No, I think he's gonna put out a box, and we're just gonna drop the answer sheet in the box. Correct. And then, he's going to email us. Well, the answer sheet, and on there, each question is going to have a percentage, like a success percentage, a class success rate per question. And the ones that have like a higher percentage of failure, like if 80% of the class missed it, he's going to review that.
Okay.
And then, if only like 10-15% of the class missed it, then he's right. You got to kind of look at that stuff yourself. So he will email. He said he was going to email the answers.
Some of that stuff is tricky.
Yeah, and it's all the wording really.
Right.
Is what they really try to use. Like you can tell that this is test prep. This isn't teaching you how to be the best real estate agent. This is literally test preparation.
Right. Yeah, when I met with Keller Williams, they were like, 80% of the stuff you won't use.
Right. Right. In the actual field.
Right.
You'll just use it to pass the test and get your license.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably take it one step further. My brother's a real estate agent. I was talking to him last night. And he's like, half the stuff you're just going to have to retire. Like, how people do it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
There's like people going to kind of like little tests, you know, it's like the real world. And he did say he knows kind of things. He's like, yeah, that's very tough. Like, even like in real life. Like, he's,
Oh yeah, you got
it's good. Yeah, it's a good instructor for that.
exactly. He's a great teacher.
Everybody talks about how good he is. So everybody talks about how good he is.
Oh, yeah.
Just to let you guys know you're all on tape.
I don't see the red light. But
That's why I'm under here. Does the red mean it's running or stop? I never saw him come turn it off, that's why.
That's why we're saying all this good stuff.
They finish your test over there.
Or am I wrong?
Well, it's one of two things. Either it has to have an expiration date, or it doesn't have to have specific performance remedies.
It has to have an expiration.
It has to have an expiration date.
What number you got?
That's number 22. So I would assume that the answer would be 1, since it's
Number
untrue
22, the
that it
answer is
should have
1.
specific performance remedies, which is not.
Number 22 is 1.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Let me know if you need some more.
I will. Keep your ears ready, because here I come.
I just want you to know you're on tape.
Hey, that's all right. That's all right. That's what collaboration is for, right? He gave us the Facebook group and gave us a test to take home for a reason. Strength in numbers.
Yeah.
I can see you took it home and didn't do it.
Not until last night.
For real?
That means you didn't
Yes,
finish.
I was up until 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my gosh. What else you
No, I
need?
had like 15 questions done before last night. I got
Oh my
3 kids and
goodness.
2 jobs.
I would've-
And I'd like to say that
I would have had a heart attack. I had to go to the ER.
I really did.
Well, you better shut up and start asking questions. You
I mean,
said you're
it's
wasting time.
done.
What else
And I
you
only
need?
have like a couple more on
Hurry
show.
up, what you need?
I never said I was stupid.
No, I
just
didn't
said
say that. I just said hurry up before you come in here. What you
Oh,
need?
yeah, we're allowed to do this.
Okay, what you need?
Yeah. I don't know. I gotta change this one for
Y'all are bad.
Really kids. I'm thinking about getting a bird. Think about getting me I used to have a bird, her name was Tutu. Oh.
Girl, I had a parakeet and that thing died and I cried like a baby.
You know I gotta take my kid off.
We need to have some lemonade out there. Some cold lemonade.
What?
Oh, I thought these are the Bahamas.
Where'd my study guide go?
Chick had to burn. I'm pretty sure I was going to burn. Sorry, I had a poor thing.
Okay, yeah, cool, that's what they must withhold the social security.
I don't think, I couldn't find that anywhere.
I couldn't either, but that's why I asked.
It was in the book. Which number was that?
27.
Yeah, I wrote down the page number because I didn't know it at all. I was completely guessing at first, and I had to look it up. Page 181.
181.
Yeah, I wrote it down because I knew it.
It was in.
He didn't say it. It was in the book.
Right, gotcha, thank you.
Can you relate?
Oh my goodness. Best lunch ever.
Yeah, it's really crazy.
Number is that.
Yeah, that was one of the ones where I took it the first time. I was like, why? I had no idea that never came up. Like, other than I thought they were all false because I'm like, I didn't know.
The reason why I knew it was because of the W-2s. You know, with the W-2s, you withhold Social Security tax.
Yeah, and I think I originally wasn't paying attention to the fact that it was saying you were hired. Like, I was thinking of it like when you said you're an independent. I'm still not sure about 72 that would come out. 72 on that map. I'm still a little
What did I put? I think I put the same thing you put. I didn't have anything.
Now I'm not sure, because if it's 50%, then it should be number 1.
I had number 1, but then I changed it to number 4.
Yeah, somebody else had 4.
That's why
How did she get 4?
I don't know.
How did everybody do 72?
That's Mandy. She might be.
Oh, yeah, I don't like it. And these are movable? I'll take the 50% and then you add together and 30 cents.
When you're adding the two taxes together, no, 3. Right. Well, the tax is 140, 163.
Yeah, you got that. So 1.6% plus 10% of itself is like, what does it come out to? 1.76? Yeah. So 1.6% becomes 1.76%. And then 1.4% becomes 1.54%. You're adding 10% of the percentage itself. It's kind of confusing. But at least that's how I used to go about it.
So your answer 1 is right. That's what I'm gonna leave it at 1. I switched it back to what I
Increased by 10%, so you can take each tax rate and add 10%.
If you don't get it wrong, he goes over it.
And just do it normally.
Oh, that's right. You know what? On the internet. You don't come up with something. That could be true. I look for something in that. This is all that we sign on anything.
Number 1, the intent, the attachment, right? Because location making a determination whether or not they want to remove it before the sale.
It's one of those things where like they meant to take it out. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah, exactly.
You found it? Is it behind?
I'm gonna need some more. I don't know what I'm gonna do until Tuesday.
This guy starts talking about thanks for when I did that. I did my face. So wait.
I told her, I did. She got
I saw you. I saw you with that paper.
I appreciate
It's not in here. That's why it's connected.
We have that,
One was just sitting there like
Did Jane go home?
How do you feel about the Victoria? I just take it because we're taking it back shortly. Yeah, that's
You got it? You're crazy.
I put a box up here at the front for your midterm. I only want the answer sheet. Before you turn them in, make sure you have your name on both pages of the answer sheet, because when I take the picture, if the name's not on both pages, I don't know who a page belongs to.
Gonna go buy a blanket.
Ready? Oh, we got 30 seconds.
Yeah. I know. That's a good idea. I bring home to American spring, so it's small enough.
I'm getting nervous with you. You're starting to look ready to go here. It gets more urgent looking every week when I look out there. If you have the baby during the exam, they charge you twice for it. Just FYI. Did you put name on both?
Yeah, she sat through the classes. Yeah.